Now the recording process is about to be done. Just wait for a couple more people to enter the room. We just have like 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I'm hearing you a little bit break up for some reason, Barb. Is it just me?
No,
No.
I'm hearing that too.
I'll put my headset on. Thank you.
Okay, all set.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First item on our agenda is public comments. And Barbara, should I do the written ones or should we do the folks that are on the line?
I can go ahead and read the summary for the written ones, please. Item 2.2.
Am I reading the 4 pages?
No, the public comment section has a summary. Public content section under.
Yeah, I only see the written statement submitted. I don't see a summary. Under 2.2, I only see the PDF with 4 pages. Oh, the bullets?
Yes, correct. That's correct.
Thank you. 1, in support of offering spring sports only if appropriate safety precautions, mask wearing, practicing outdoors, staying 6 feet apart, and reducing carpools / shared rides to and from practice are adhered to, and 3, in support of making sports happen. So thank you so much, Barb, for getting those summarized for us. And whenever you're ready to have the first person in.
Okay. The first speaker is Maddie Reed.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Maddie Reed. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a senior at West and a captain of the swim team. And I'm here to talk about the virtual season for alternate sports, alternate fall sports, sorry. I wanted to kind of start off by saying that I know that you'll probably hear a lot about personal loss that this unfortunate situation has created. But I kind of want to take these 3 minutes to talk about the community loss, because that's what we're truly losing, a community of people that may not otherwise be brought together. So in my opinion, athletics outside of the classroom builds this bond between you and your teammates that's different from the bond you may build with your classmates. Whether you're encouraging each other to dig deep and persevere through a hard workout, or you're cheering a teammate on in a competition, this kind of bond is different because it creates kind of a shared joy and a shared experience. And it cannot be created in the classroom, and definitely not over a camera. Second, I think that we can all agree as a community, MMSD values activities outside of the classroom. This is evident as if you go to a high school within MMSD, you can compete in anything from golf to hockey to diving to volleyball. The list goes on, and that's not to mention the hundreds of clubs that are offered across the high schools. Furthermore, the district offers so many different options because they know the life skills that it teaches us and the support systems that it gives us. And these are lessons that we cannot learn from core classes or electives and communities that we cannot build in the classroom, let alone over a Zoom. Athletics teaches us qualities like perseverance and resilience, 2 qualities that I've used especially in this past year and will use for the rest of my life. Also, MMSD has had to get very creative this school year, to say the least. just to make sure that average day-to-day events run smoothly. And students and teachers have gotten really creative by learning and teaching in their houses. And I think we've all proven to ourselves that we can get creative. So why does it stop at athletics? I think we as athletes know how to stay safe. Some of us who are fortunate enough to have the ability to compete with club teams know all of the procedures and guidelines to follow. We are still building that community and learning those essential life skills that turn us into high functioning adults. However, others who are not able to participate in club sports are missing out on having that community and that outlet and having those valuable experiences. For many students, high school sports kind of creates that access to learn those lessons and build that community, which are two things that cannot be done over Zoom and two things that are absolutely irreplaceable in our high school education. So I ask you to please get creative and know that we as athletes take this very seriously and will follow every guideline, every expectation, and every procedure to a T, because like you, we want to keep everyone safe and healthy. And in a world that's trying to divide us right now, kind of let us use that power of shared joy and experience that athletics brings to create an even stronger MMSD community and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddie.
Next speaker is Natalie Pollak.
Thank you, Barb. Hi, Natalie.
Hi. Can I get
Whenever
started?
you're ready. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Natalie Pollak. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a senior and captain of the girls' swim team at West. I understand that each of us has been impacted in different ways by the coronavirus, and that we have each struggled individually to cope with the challenges presented by the pandemic in our own ways. For me, remaining physically active through this time has been my main source of discipline and normalcy in an otherwise confusing and turbulent period. I feel incredibly fortunate that I live in an area with plenty of paths for running that I was able to utilize during the spring while my club swim team was unable to practice in person, and that my club team provided me with daily strength workouts. I'm also thankful that I've been able to return to the pool, as my club team is now able to safely train in person again. This has not only helped me stay active, but it's given me an opportunity to socialize with others and spend time with my friends in a safe environment. I recognize my privilege in being able to say that I, unlike so many others whose families are unable to participate in club sports, am able to continue participating in athletics at this time. For many, high school sports are their only opportunity to get involved in athletics, and one of their primary means of socializing and interacting with their peers. While I love to train and compete, the most important part of high school athletics for me is the community, as I found some of my closest friends on the team and have learned important life lessons, such as leadership, teamwork, compassion, and the importance of a positive mental attitude. Additionally, many of the seniors such as myself have missed out on some of our most formative high school experiences through the cancellation of athletics, and I know it means so much to so many of us to regain even a fraction of what we have lost this year. It is not correct to equate in-person athletics with in-person schooling, as it has been proven that athletics can be conducted safely and responsibly for all those involved. All students deserve to have the same opportunities that I have enjoyed throughout my time as a high school athlete, which encourages not only their physical health, but their mental and emotional well-being. And this is an experience that simply cannot be replaced virtually. I appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
Our next speaker is Natalie Schick.
Hello, Natalie.
Hi.
Hi. Whenever you're ready. Oh, and looks like you just had a birthday.
Yeah, I just turned 18.
So happy birthday to you.
Thank you. My name is Natalie Schick, and I have swam for West since I was a freshman and will be swimming for Rutgers University next year. Being a senior, I have watched 3 years of seniors get to take part in special dress-ups, senior night, and much else. I've been looking forward to my senior year swim season since I was very little. Every other piece of my senior year has been stripped away from me, and the only thing I've been holding out hope for was this alternative spring season. My junior year WIA state meet did not go as I had hoped, and the only thoughts that ran through my mind ever since then have been, at least I'll have my senior year. Although the meets are important to me, the practices and being a part of such a close team brings a joy to swimming that is indescribable. Sports do more for students than just develop athletic skills. Sports teach teamwork, leadership, confidence, and help build self-esteem. I am extremely fortunate to have access to a club team here and to be able to train consistently with a team in Texas. I was fortunate enough this past fall to be able to move to Texas for several months to train. Many kids do not have these opportunities, and without high school athletics, they are missing out on athletic opportunities altogether. It is extremely frustrating to see that all other teams in the Big 8 Conference outside of Madison get to have their swim season. It does not make sense that just by living 10 minutes from where I live currently, I could have had my sports season. It has felt like much of the board has not acknowledged the toll that not having sports has had on our student athletes. When I heard the news of MMSD not having the alternative spring season, I was absolutely devastated. This being canceled hurt the most out of everything that's been canceled for me during this pandemic. High school swimming is truly the highlight of my entire high school experience. I cannot speak to the science piece, but I do know that there are options. It is completely unreasonable to not allow sports to happen until we are fully in the building. A building with 2,400 students may be high risk, but a low contact sport with 30 to 40 athletes is low risk. The two of these are vastly different and should not be equated to one another. Athletics are optional, and there are enough people interested that these options should exist. Low contact sports have been proved to be a low risk activity, and club teams and high school teams in the area have been holding safe practices and meets, and there's no reason why we cannot do the same. There's been 10 plus months to plan for the season, and all districts around us have found an option. MMSD is not. I strongly encourage you to reconsider the alternative spring season. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you.
Our fourth speaker is Nana Osaki.
Hi, Nana.
Hi.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. My name's Nana Osaki. I'm a junior on the Madison West dance team. And I just wanted to come in here and just talk about my support for restarting sports. So essentially right now, the dance team, just for context, we're just participating in virtual competitions. However, while I'm able to submit like a solo dance just by myself, because we aren't allowed to access the school gyms to any extent, I know people are at various like economic disadvantages, which prevents many from submitting these dances. And this is what I heard from coach, but we are not allowed to access our team funds in order to pay for virtual competitions, which has made some things challenging. And additionally, it's been like difficult because we see a lot of other schools participating even in the virtual sections, which are less than 10 people. And it's completely on our own, like at our own risk. No one is pushed to participate in these events. And it would just be great if we could get like permission to just participate in just virtual events. This might just be for dance and cheer, but like that extent would really help us. And additionally, like having dance has been a really great social outlet for me personally and a great support group during this time.
Thank you so much, Nana.
Yep, thank you.
Our next speaker is Bella Garnetsky.
Hi, Bella.
Hello, my name is Bella Garnetsky. I'm a junior at West and I'm on the girls swim and dive team. I wrote an email last week about the topic of spring sports. The reason given for not having spring sports seems to be no in-person school means no sports. That doesn't make sense to me though, because bringing over 2,000 kids back into the school building is way different than letting less than 40 kids into the building. That also doesn't explain why other schools in our conference and in Jane County are currently competing in their sports and are not yet in person. The Verona boys swim team just had a full swim season and they don't go back to school until February 8th. I do understand the safety aspect of not wanting to spread COVID. I know I don't want COVID and I don't want it to spread, but there are other factors that need to be taken into consideration. Every sport that is played during the spring season is outside, which means there can be gatherings up to 50 people, and it is less likely for COVID to spread outside. These teams will not even be in the school building after February if the weather permits. Swimming is the only one that would be inside the school building. I've been swimming with my club team, and the only reported cases we have had are 2 coaches, and it's never spread to anyone else. We are able to easily space out in the pool and have 6 to 12 girls at a practice. We have 36 girls on our swim team, so we can have multiple practices or practice groups to help space things out, and COVID has not been proven to spread through chlorine yet. There are many other studies that prove athletics can work. Spring sports can work. It is working for everyone else, so why can't it work for us? Why are we the exception? Teens in high school need sports now more than ever. Today in my Spanish class, we did a word garden where everyone types words of how they feel about the second semester. There weren't many positive words. The biggest words I saw were overwhelmed, bored, stressed, sad, nervous, and tired of Zoom. I hope those words show you where we at mentally. Trust us to be responsible to have athletics. Please give us something normal back. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella.
Our next speaker is Kate Aman Lavicki.
Thank you, Barb.
Hi. Hi, my name is Kate and I'm a sophomore at West. Last year I ran cross country, played basketball, and started playing soccer. Sports are an incredibly important part of my life now, and I hope to continue to play soccer in college. Playing sports makes me feel good physically, connects me with other people, and teaches me many life lessons. I really miss school sports, and I would like to see MMSD try to figure out a way to let student athletes participate in sports even while we are going through school virtually. I know that student athletes speaking tonight don't represent the diversity of our high schools, but getting online to join these meetings can be difficult, and not everyone who has something to say is able to join. Through our texts and Zooms, we know our teammates in all sports and throughout the school want to return to athletics too. When the soccer season got canceled last spring, I was so disappointed. I had looked forward to playing all year, and just as so many students we didn't play. But right now I'm super hopeful we can have some sort of a season this spring. I've been lucky enough to drive almost 2 hours each way several times a week to play soccer, and I'm fortunate to have workout equipment at home and be able to go to a gym. But I know many student athletes in our schools don't have the same opportunities. But all of us would like to get back to school sports where we can have an opportunity to play. High school sports are more than just competing, but also about the friendships and teammates you get to share fun times with. The lack of sports seasons has taken its toll on many students' mental health, and being given the chance to get back to playing like so many other students around us in Wisconsin and across the country would bring a sense of normalcy back into our lives. It's frustrating and heartbreaking to hear about so many of my friends from schools in places like Milwaukee and Mount Horeb and Verona, so close, who are getting the opportunity to play or even just the chance to practice in some form, while we have to stay seated on the sidelines. I ask the board to please consider the Public Health of Madison and Dane County statements that it's okay to hold practices and competitions where physical distancing is maintained with up to 10 people indoors and 50 people outdoors, and look at the many successful high school sports seasons currently happening all around us when deciding if we should go back on the field. As of today, over 1,000 people in MMSD have signed a petition to return to sports. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kate.
Our next speaker is Dennis Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes, are you able to turn on your mic and your video, please? Ms. Rhodes? Mr. Rhodes? It says Megan, but you're listed as
Hi.
Dennis.
Hi, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, sorry about that.
That's okay.
I don't have much to add to these passionate student voices, and I also want to confess I'm not on any dance or swim team at West currently, but I do have a couple of student athletes at home, and I don't think my kids are unique, but I think they would really benefit. They would be able to engage better academically, I am sure, if they were able to participate in spring sports. I know a number of the coaches, my kids are at JMM, the coaches there are just great. I think they are more than equipped to handle a season safely, to handle practices safely. I think the public health professionals are now on board that particularly outdoor sports can be managed safely. So again, I think the students have articulated this pretty well. I do want to end with one of my daughters kind of put a very fine point on it when she said, you know, the pros are competing, the colleges are competing, the clubs are competing, and now it really hurts to see the other Big 8 schools competing when we're not. And I think it is breeding a little bit of cynicism and anger with the kids, which is just something you don't like to see in high school students, or you don't like to see, you know, high school sports breeding that kind of attitude. So I appreciate your consideration, and I hope we can work out that we have spring athletics. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our final speaker is Sherry Schwartz.
Thank you, Barb. I think we can hear the background, but
Still joining.
oh,
She's having a little bit of difficulty. There she comes.
hi, Sherry. Hello, can you hear us?
Sherry, can you unmute your mic, please?
I couldn't hear you. Okay.
There you go. Okay.
Hi.
Yeah, my name is Sherry Schwartz, and I'm speaking as a parent of a JMM ninth grader. And I'm going to start by saying there's a woman in my neighborhood who's an elderly widow, and I've been calling her every week or two during quarantine and just checking up how she's doing, giving her someone to talk to. And this weekend, she finally got to go and be with her family out of town. But the reason wasn't because she got a vaccine and it was safer than before. The reason is because she was attending her grandson's funeral. He was 18 years old, He died from suicide last week. A week ago today, he was still alive. And that's the reason I'm here in support of high school athletics and getting something in person for our high schoolers in whatever way we can. I think especially if we don't return to in-person classes for high school, which I hope we do, but especially if we don't, it's even more important to offer athletics and hopefully other extracurriculars too that provided students a chance to be face-to-face with each other, face-to-face with adults outside of their parents and their family, and just the chance to be outside and exercise. All those things are known to improve mental health status. And just from observing my own son and his friends, they're really needing that. So, and this boy who died last week, his name is Carter. And I'm sure that of the hundreds of student athletes who would participate if we offered spring sports, there are at least a few Carters there. And that's why we should do it. Thank you.
Sure.
That was the last speaker.
Thank you so much, Barb. I wanted to start the meeting. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we have meeting notes.
Yep, August 3rd.
So I move to approve the meeting, the minutes from the instruction work group meeting dated August 3rd, 2020.
Second.
Gomez Smith, Nikki, second. Any comments or corrections? Julia, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Barb. So before we begin, I wanted to acknowledge that for almost 100 years, this country have acknowledged Black history in some way or form, starting with a few days to now celebrating an entire or acknowledging an entire month. I urge folks that are watching us, in particular educators, to learn more about what the history of this month means to our Black students and our Black families, but in particular for non-Black individuals. What is our responsibility? What do we need to know about this month and this date? So I acknowledge that today is the first day of Black history, and let me say this differently. It's not very common that we have Black board members and Black leadership at a school district, leading the school district. And as I understand that there are many folks that are not used to non-white leadership. So I wanted to, one, acknowledge today, but also open space for my Black colleagues to share a few words, and also to Dr. Jenkins to share a few words on that, if they may choose.
Want to start with the board members?
Saban or Ali?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't necessarily prepared to speak to Black History Month. And I think speaking to Black History Month or Black history in general is a pretty, serious, wide-ranging and extensive comment. And I think particularly given where we have positioned or the conditions of Black America today, that, being able to speak to the implications of Black history as an educator and as a board member is something that I think takes a really substantial amount of time and space, although I appreciate the acknowledgement in instruction work group. I guess I think, really, really talking about this from a curricular standpoint would mean it would be baked into tonight's agenda in a different way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo what Ali just said. History isn't history, it's still living in us. And I guess to quote Dr. Carter G. Woodson, or paraphrase for instruction work group, with no study, no progress. So let's keep on studying.
Dr. Jenkins?
I would just like to add, am I breaking up first of all? Okay. All right, great. First of all, thank you for those comments to both of the board members. And I would just say for myself, having done 30 years in education and just seen different things and different acknowledgments for African-American history, there are so many contributions that have been made. And I think it's even greater, not just on the African-Americans, but for other individuals to be able to understand the contributions that African-Americans have made to this country, from the White House to the current residents, the individuals reside in now. The contributions are just so many over time. And even though it's a month, this is something that we should be acknowledging daily. It should be within our everyday curriculum, and it should be something that's celebrated by all. I appreciate the moment to pause, but don't pause. Let's figure out a way to keep running. This has been a part of the American journey. Of everything that you look at around you, from the science to the math, African Americans have contributed to it, to the literature. African Americans have contributed to it. And I think it's time in our country, as we begin to have this serious discussion about our democracy, is it now democracy for all, or is it democracy for some? And I think as we really look at the history of African American history, there are some lessons in it that we should probably take forward as we consider the contributions of African Americans. And I am so proud to be here as superintendent, and not just as African American superintendent, but as superintendent. And I hope that when people see me, they don't see the first and the last superintendent that looks like me, because there are many more children, and there were people before me, and there will be people come after me that are going to be more qualified than myself. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins, and thank you to my colleagues. And you're absolutely correct. We'll make sure that to rectify for future board meetings that we ensure that an agenda item is illuminating this important fact. And in particular, that the fact that in Wisconsin, we have a legislation that ensures or asks for all school districts to ensure that we have factual information about Black history and African American history. So thank you all. With that, we'll start our instruction work group with an opening comments and updates regarding reopening schools. And I shared an email with you all earlier today. Thank you so much, Barb, to getting us set up. I shared an email earlier today. I think that some folks that were confused about how those updates were going to happen in a weekly basis. And there might be some confusion among some of my colleagues expecting a review of every single item around what our staff is working on in regards to COVID. And that was not the intention. The intention is for us to learn about progress, learn about updates, and in particular to elevate issues that are either being brought to us by community members. For example, the topic that we are elevating tonight around athletics, as well as any topics that board members are concerned. In particular to mention around the times of our meetings and how much time we're allocating to the entire discussion. given the fact that we had already a pretty robust agenda item calendar set yearly set for instruction work group, and adding now COVID and reopening as an additional item. So I appreciate everyone's understanding of that and grace of that, and I certainly appreciate everyone's respect for my leadership in this work group. If there are things about this work group that is not working well, I would love to hear those comments and concerns, and definitely would love to hear if there are other ways to improve this early part of our meeting, which is the updates on virtual learning and now reopening schools. Nikki?
Nanda, I never received the email for some reason.
Oh, it was sent to the board address, but I'll forward it
Sure. For
to
some
your
reason,
email directly.
I haven't been getting the board emails always. I don't know if it's my Yahoo was being a pain in the butt, but I'm using my MMSD address, and so I don't know why.
Nikki,
Maybe
I can
just
talk to
doesn't
you
like-
about that on the side if you
Okay,
want.
sure.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Nikki. I tried to summarize as much as I could now.
I
And
appreciate
then,
that.
yeah, no problem. And then with that, I would like to turn to Dr. Jenkins to begin this presentation.
Okay. First of all, let me just acknowledge, thank you too, for clarifying in terms of what we are trying to do each month as a team, particularly with the instructional work group, as we have the calendar that was already set for the year. But during this time of COVID, we want to pivot and make sure that we're bringing everyone along with the number of things that's happening with our schools relative to our looking at reopening. We started off in January 8th, we sent out the communication and said we're going to start off third term and virtual, but there's so much work being done behind the scene to get to the point to where we can reopen our schools. And I can't go any further without acknowledging the fact the night of our students coming in, the powerful words that they shared with us. We know this because we've been talking to our students as well, and a number of them have shared very similar sentiments, and we do appreciate them, our students uplifting their voices tonight and coming here. And thank you to the parents who shared their thoughts with us. Tonight, you're going to hear more of some update on in terms of what we're going to do in terms of reopening. And in fact, tonight, athletics is on the table to discuss in terms of how we're looking at our entire managing this whole unprecedented situation whereas we're trying to get as many voices as we can, continue to allow the science and safety to lead us as we move forward. But we have learned more information, and you will hear a little bit about that tonight as we've confirmed some things we felt, and we're also continuing to learn every day. So this time I would just like to turn it over to the team, and we're going to begin the presentation addressing the PowerPoints.
Thanks, Dr. Jenkins. Appreciate it. And I do want to echo, it was really great to hear that student voice, the public comments today. And I think that first slide that we're seeing about our athletics department vision. And to introduce myself, Jeremy Schlitz, he, him, and I'm the athletic director for our district. And I also oversee memorial athletics at the building level. You know, the vision up there, and we developed this vision 5 years ago as part of, you know, a look at the board level regarding the role athletics plays in our schools. And we use many different approaches to that, and how the impact of co-curriculars and educational outcomes were related to sports. From paralleling you know, both our instructional model, but also at that time, pathways and accessibility and varied experiences. And really what I think we're seeing right now with the secondary and tertiary effect on the school community and really the community at large as we move towards that. So it was, you know, it's excellent to hear from the students and to continue learning, you know, as we work through this. I look back, you know, 10.5 months ago is really kind of when, I guess in retrospect, we started kind of using that POC DICE approach to formulate, you know, what we needed to do. And we pivoted really quickly last spring and developed what I would say was kind of the blueprint across the state for what virtual athletics looked like. We have not canceled any of our seasons. We've been fortunate enough to advocate for different alternatives, but also to really to produce robust programming from our coaches and involving our students, whether that was last spring or as we kind of finish up some winter seasons right now. As we work through that, I gotta say how much I appreciate how our coaches and student athletes are embracing the we is greater than me philosophy on a greater scale, recognizing the sacrifices they are making to help keep the greater community in better health by reducing the number of ways the virus can spread, and recognizing that the privilege of education-based athletics shouldn't impact the right to an education. And back in March when we moved to that and paralleled our instructional model virtually, we also started planning for alternatives. We successfully were able to look at some relief for fall sports, as we moved into July and August, and that alternative season starts beginning here in February and all the way through to the end of March to try to slot in those fall sports that were unable to occur. And it also created a spring season, which starts a little bit later. Right now, we're just finishing up a winter season where we had, similar levels of participation in person as we did virtually, with which is what we offered for our winter sports. So now as we kind of look forward, Barb, if you want to advance that to kind of the current status, I'll give you a quick overview, and then I'm looking forward to taking some questions from the board and hopefully helping, further illuminate kind of where we're at. So our current status is we are offering virtual athletics, and what that is 4 to 5 hours of programming for those students that are in person, are in season, in terms of the WIA calendar, because that allows our coaches unrestricted access to kind of what they do with them. And what they're doing is great. It's great to see the innovation and the different ways that they're connecting with the students, both to support their physical health, but also their mental health. We've tried to do our best to kind of put out some different ways as the 4 different high schools kind of learn from each other around how to connect the kids and what kids are doing. I think back a week and a half ago, I was able to facilitate a trivia competition related to high school gymnastics for all of our schools, and it was great to see and be part of that. And I know there's lots of things like that happening in our different places. And so we're doing that, and at the same time we're trying to figure out how we get back to what we all want, and that is to be able to do things in some ways the way that they used to be done, but also just that gathering of in-person sports and some of those other pieces. We meet regularly with the Big 8 Conference. We've got a bi-weekly meeting with Dane County Public Health and their sports liaison for all the athletic directors there. Statewide, I'm part of our Wisconsin Athletic Directors leadership, and we've got quite a repository of resources for our coaches and our student athletes to access, as we work through that. And I think, as you can see, I tried to bring out a couple of the virtual athletic programming pieces that I think are important. We've really focused on the connectivity and the ways to get students an opportunity to feel comfortable in a vulnerable space. And I think our coaches have done a fabulous job of providing that space, and to see the cameras come on when I stop in at a virtual practice, and to see the kids engaging and doing that. They are finding ways, it's not obviously what we all prefer, but they're finding ways to smile and laugh together. We're providing the academic supports. Our coaches are monitoring attendance and grades regularly, and are another advocate for our students as they work through the curricular work and what they need to do to be good students first. We've had an opportunity to help with some of the transition to high school for both our freshmen and actually this year's 8th graders, because we're able to connect a little bit more easily as we become well-versed in the virtual world and virtual meetings as students and coaches. And we've really provided physical training opportunities for all and some sports-specific one as able. And I think we've used our athletic trainers from the UW to help do some prehab and rehab work for our students. And I really appreciate what our coaches have done to find ways to keep the kids engaged and to keep them active, both physically and mentally, as we work through that. A couple of the silver linings, I think, were some of the social justice work we've been able to do with our student athletes to have that pause where we're not chasing from a practice or to a game, and to be able to look at our platform as athletes and leaders in our schools and communities, and to work on some of those bigger picture work, which has been really an excellent thing to do as well. So that's kind of where we're at. As I said, we haven't canceled anything yet right now. As alternate fall season starts, we are in a virtual model, but we continually evaluate that as we move forward as that goes. And then Barb, if you want to jump to the next slide. You know, in terms of return to play considerations, obviously the science continues to evolve on what would be the best way we approach it. It's been pretty consistent that the way to help support, you know, from a public health standpoint is to limit those gatherings outside of the home and to limit travel. But the bottom line is, you know, athletics, as we've learned, should parallel what we're looking at from a general education piece, because we don't want that privilege of high school athletics to impact the right to an education for all our students. And as we look at those guidance from public health and some of the operational guidance, you know, it continually changes. I just saw this afternoon, the National Federation came out with some updates to their COVID approach in terms of the way that they look at different risk factors. And, you know, I appreciate the ability to collaborate with both public health, with our advisory group, with the coaches and ADs across the city, across the county, across the state, and across the country as we do that. And, you know, I really think the hard part here is this is what we all want. And how do we do it for what we all need? And that's really what, as ADs and coaches and student athletes, we're doing, I think, really a great job of gathering all those perspectives and figuring out how we can do it and how we can do it better as each day goes on. And I did mention there at the bottom, the alternate fall season dates, which were our traditional fall sports, which we have 11 of that we offer, normally would start up in August, range from start dates of February 8th, next Monday, all the way out till March 29th. And our traditional spring sports, which would start as early as the first week of March, all of our traditional spring season start dates from the WI have been moved back to April 19th. So that does give us some more time as we prepare to get back to that. And then finally, I did request additional accommodation with the WIAA, our state governing body, for some flexibility about contact if we're unable to do in-person activities during those calendar WIA dates, to allow the potential for some school-based contact either later this spring or summer for those winter and alternate fall or spring sports if we are in that situation. So I hope that kind of gets you up to speed on where we're at, and I'd love to take some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jeremy. It was nice meeting you. Barb, whenever you can to take down the slide presentation, thank you. And Nikki, I see your hand.
This is not really a question, it's more of a comment. One, thank you, Jeremy, for your work. Thank you, Mike Hernandez, for your work. Now, people are gonna go, well, you're not an athlete, you shouldn't speak on this. I grew up with athletics. I traveled with the college basketball team for 23 years in close contact. When one person gets sick, everyone ends up getting some form of it. I have managed to get everything other than measles from the team at some point in my life, whether it be from water bottles, close contact, Dixie cups, etc. And it's not from people not being careful. It's about air circulation. And I think the way people, first of all, I love the fact our students were so eloquent in speaking, but I think the issue is the HVAC issue. Right now, we heard during the referendum that West has some serious air quality problems in the pool. I'm not sure I want to put people in a building where we have compromised HVAC on a disease that we know is airborne. I want kids to have an outlet. I believe that sports are necessary for the mental health. I know this is rough on mental health, but it's also rough to lose a student, to lose a teacher. And what I'm afraid is someone comes home and gives it to someone else. We have seen grandparents die after weddings, after funerals, after small gatherings that were supposedly safe. And I worry about that and the effects on our students because I don't think mentally anyone can deal with it. I've lost 5 friends during this pandemic, 3 virtual in the disability community, 2 that I knew in real life. It's not something I take lightly. It's something I talk a heck of a lot about. But very simply, I don't want to take the chance of infecting somebody and having them lose their life. The people who right now are getting this disease most are Black, brown, and disabled individuals, up to 4 times as many as white individuals. I don't know if we can really make that risk and that sacrifice when the price is someone's life. I just can't do it.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Schmidt.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy, for joining us today. And thanks for all the work that's going on with the athletic directors, with all the coaches to try to stay connected to students while we're in this virtual mode. I guess, the first thing I would respond to, and just Nikki, I appreciate your comments. I think everybody wants to keep people safe in this pandemic. And I guess one of the questions I have is, are we aiming for zero risk? Because we're not going to get to zero risk for a really long time. So I guess I'm coming at this from the perspective is that we've learned a lot since last fall, and we've learned a lot about the strategies that can be put into place to keep students and keep coaches safe, and especially outdoors when we're talking about, sports outdoors. So I guess, I'll just say that I'm a huge proponent of youth sports and the large array of extracurricular opportunities that students can participate in our high schools. From clubs to drama, speech, you name it, there's a lot of activities that go on in our high schools. And I see how sports can motivate students to stay engaged in school and provide accountability feedback loops through relationships that are developed with staff and their coaches and teammates. So as we look at the K-12 system and our phased approach to reopening to in-person instruction, I guess I'm asking what's possible and what's reasonable at the high school level. Our students are in school virtually. They're learning, they're participating in classes, even if they aren't physically in our buildings due to the logistics of having 2,000 students plus staff back in a single school building. And I guess, I don't have to reiterate the importance of keeping students connected and engaged and addressing the real mental health challenges that many of our teenagers are facing during this pandemic. I think we have a lot of students disengaged and disconnected from school right now. And I'd argue that even the ones that are showing up in virtual learning day to day are struggling to stay engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And
is there a question for Jeremy?
Yep, I do have a question. So I guess, my question looking forward, my primary question is, can sports and other extracurriculars start in person before students are back in our high school buildings for in-person instruction? We had a written comment from an epidemiologist shared on our board docs today that she thinks virtual school with outdoor sports this spring would be safer than in-person learning with no sports included. And I guess another question, so that's sort of the primary point. What's possible? Can we do this? And have we categorized our sports into low risk, medium risk, and high risk, and started to work to define what modifications would be needed to provide an in-person experience for each sport this spring?
Thanks. Yeah, I'll grab a couple of those. In terms of the safety of our students and student athletes, I think I linked in the presentation something from the American Medical Association regarding kind of the sports and interplay with athletics. And I do want to share kind of one of the things it's obviously a collaborative approach to the whole picture, as you mentioned, Chris. talking with other ADs around the state, the impact that it has on when somebody on a team gets infected, the number of students that, these are schools that are back in person in different parts of the state or whatever, end up being quarantined because the team membership is an additional grouping, in terms of where that goes. So obviously the connectivity of sports is extremely important. The other thing that you mentioned in terms of the safety piece of it, we're starting to see some emerging data and science around the residual effects of COVID and what that means for our cardiovascular system. And I do want to make sure we prepare our students that maybe have recovered from a COVID infection to make sure they're getting the proper information and screening needed to make sure we're not putting them at risk as well. In terms of the outdoor versus indoor and then the different risk levels associated, that NFHS sports medical advisory document that I referenced earlier actually went away from the different tiers of sport contact. And I think that the publication actually might come out tomorrow, but it talked more about indoor versus outdoor, masked versus unmasked, and how both returning to school and returning to sports parallels the virus trajectory of the community spread. Haven't had a chance to digest a lot of that information in there yet, and I don't know that necessarily answers your question, and please clarify if there's a detail I can add, but Public Health Madison-Dane County and their orders have been using high, medium, and low risk sports based upon the closeness of the contact, but also just the nature of the sport previously, and I don't know if this release from the National Federation is something that might change it. And to the other out-of-school activities, the National Federation of High Schools also speaks to our fine arts and music band and all those sorts of things. So that guidance has been really helpful as we continue to plan for if we are able to and when we are able to, how to do it best.
Yeah, I just think we need to look at it on an individual sport basis. And again, I'm just going to really encourage us to look and sort of change the mindset around what is possible. Instead of a blanket, we can't do anything. I would just really urge us to say, what might be possible for us to do in bringing small groups of high school students back for athletics, because I truly appreciate what has been going on virtually, but it's just not the same. And I don't think it's working. I mean, what I've been hearing from high school students is just not working in the same ways that, being on a field or being outside, with your teammates does. And that's, a consequence of the pandemic, but I just like us to, think proactively and looking ahead towards spring and what's possible.
Thank you, Chris. And then I saw, Julia, did you have your hand up?
I didn't, but I do have a question. Yeah, it's sort of similar to what Christina was saying, but I was wondering if you could kind of just speak to why, or the connection between bringing students back to school and bringing them back into sports, and how that might be different, or why they've been decided to be the same.
Well, I think right now that connection has been, all of our winter sports that are currently ongoing are also in the building, and I think we've seen quite the concern around indoor gatherings. In fact, public health limits your sport gatherings to 10 people indoors at this point. Going forward, as the science and the public health decisions and the research evolves, I think, everything's on the table. And as somebody who loves to plan for every contingency, back when I was both coaching and as an athletic director, we'll be ready when we can do that appropriately. And just to piggyback on that, we have some really unique ways of maybe avoiding some of those large gatherings for practice that we're seeing from others that are trying it. But the other feedback we're hearing from schools around is also, we definitely can't provide that experience that they're used to because you're not going to have the team dinners, you're not going to have the locker rooms, you're not going to have a lot of those things. So we really try to manage not only what it means to recreate and compete in the sport, but what it means to be part of education-based athletics and that overall genuine experience. And Dr. Jenkins, I think you also had something you wanted to add?
Yes. First of all, I just want to say thank you for the questions, and thank you to Mr. Slits for his response. And I would like everyone to know just the team we have, internal, external, the advisory teams. This is a collaborative effort, and you heard Mr. Slits there share a plethora of information with you. We're not just taking a single source. We're working with our colleagues. I'm working with the regional superintendents, state superintendents. He's working with the regional athletic directors, state. And I think to Chris's question in terms of the direct correlation, the answer is no, not necessarily, because if we begin to phase, which is our hope to begin to reopen, there may be new information gathered from our public health, from national, about particular sports. And you heard the difference between, not just to you, Chris, I'm saying to everyone, we've heard the difference between indoor, outdoor, some of the distinctions between them that would make it safer. We're still leading with the science, we're still leading with safety, and we understand the mental health piece is serious. And to all of you, the whole co-curricular participation, that's what my dissertation was on, and talk about the benefits of co-curricular. If anyone want to see children engage and know the benefits, I'm telling you, I've studied this, and I know that is really tough at this time. It's tough at all of us. This is a pandemic, but we are looking at ways that we can engage students outside of just the classroom, socio-emotional, and paying attention to their mental health. But we're looking at, and Mr. Slitz, I want to tell you thank you publicly for just the breadth of information you bring. And every time I go to him and I'm asking him questions, you better believe it, just like he just told you about some recent research, he's all over it and trying to get it to the point where we can do some things safely in our community. So thank you. And Julia, really thank you for that question on the student side, because they've been lifting that up. What's the difference between the two? So thank you.
Thank you so much. So I see Ali, Savian, Nikki, Gloria, and Chris.
Jeremy, I have heard you reference comparing kind of our approach to athletics to districts across the state. A few weeks ago, or even a couple months ago, Tony Evers said that folks needed to cut down on things like play dates and small group gatherings, because that was where the spike in COVID was coming from as schools were closed. There's only 2% of districts across this country that serve over 20,000 students a year. MMSD is one of 3 districts in the state that serves over 20,000 students a year. How is our approach compared to other districts of our size and scale?
Yeah, actually had a call today with Racine and MPS's directors of athletics as well. They're in the same position we are in from a state perspective right now. But I think I have much respect for Jeff Sullivan out of Maryland County, a large district on the East Coast, and he and I share some information back and forth about different ways to approach it, and I've stolen some ideas from him around our virtual impact. And I think a lot of it really just speaks to the connectivity of schools, school sports, and the community, and making sure that that's the approach that we're taking. There are some, obviously, in different parts of the country that are also trying to do it in person. And I think what we saw in the fall was about a third of the scheduled contests ended up being rescheduled or postponed and those are from smaller districts or different situations with maybe less community spread. So the disruption that would be both to the academic and athletic is definitely a consideration we look at as we do those planning. And is it appropriate to have this size group, whether it's 5 or 10 or 25? And how do we, limit risk while still trying to make sure that we're giving everybody the best opportunity to do this.
Thank you so much for speaking to that.
Thank you, Ali, for contextualizing, really trying to compare apples to apples. Green Bay is also 20, a large district, over 20,000. And I think those districts are struggling like we are trying to figure this out. So I appreciate that. Savian, I think you have a question.
Yep. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I guess 2 comments and a question. 1, I appreciate your La Follette sweater. 2, I do just, in terms of in-person athletics, I do just want to remind people about that study from Ohio State outlining, 30% of their athletes that had COVID do have a permanent change in their heart structure. That's something that I view as irreparable behind, compared to an ACL tear, for example. So we're dealing with that kind of stuff. I guess my question is, what kind of learning are we doing from the MSCR Outdoors Club? Are there ways that we can try and replicate their success? Are there ways that, that we can learn from what they're doing, especially as the weather gets warmer? And and as the vaccines get distributed around middle March, April, hopefully, and as we look at summer semester.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and actually was just doing a little research. Penn is doing a study on the residual effects of COVID and on youth sports and youth athletes around myocarditis that you had referenced. And I think that's really something that we need to make sure is part of the conversation, so we can make sure we educate people, as we work through what it means to come back and when we come back. In terms of what we can learn from some of those MSCR activities, I think it's good information about those size groups and what they're doing outside. I think what the hard part is when we look at traditionally a fall season, which is our alternate fall starting up here potentially, we're talking about close to 2,100 students that are part of our fall sports traditionally, where those MSCR outdoor activities are doing that in small groups. And that's not to say we can't offer small group solutions to our larger teams. But obviously we do need to make sure that we're not using 24 hours of the day to make sure we meet all those students' needs as we do it. And I think we've got some creative potential solutions where small groups could be made where we aren't meeting at schools and we're using our virtual platforms to do some things and maybe have that model of that small group outdoor activity be something that is workable. But that obviously isn't what we normally think of when we think of high school sports. And we're definitely trying to be creative. And it's great to hear from the coaches about their ideas and ways to do this as well, which I've been lucky enough to do through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think it'll be interesting as we prepare for hopefully, bolstered summer semester, if we can offer some type of, athletic or physical activity, even if it isn't the traditional, team sports as we know it from previous years.
Thank you, Savian. Thank you. Gloria?
Thank you, Ananda. And thank you, Jeremy, for being here. I just want to say, it's not necessarily a question. I just want to say that we all want to have our kids back in school. And we all want our kids to get back to somewhat normal, to play sports. I don't think anybody on this board wants to keep us from that. And I think we are all just very concerned and bring our variety of perspectives on the issue. I think that we are unfortunately we're stuck given the obviously the health pandemic and given what's happening politically around us and how the repeal of a mask mandate can significantly bring us back months of progress, right? We are in a very good space right now. Like I can see the light, like it is coming. But that is because we are seeing people wearing their mask. They are being very careful, and we just need to we need to keep doing that. Unfortunately, what's happening at the state level politically is not helping our cause. My son just got COVID, and he's really sick. He's really, really sick, and he's young. He's in his early 20s. And so this is going to have long-term impact on him. And he wasn't an athlete. He wasn't playing sports. He was just going to work. And so I just ask us to really consider, what the alternative is if we have our kids go back and play sports. My daughter is an athlete, attends Memorial High School, is a swimmer, basketball player, volleyball. She wants to play. I want to get her out there to play. But what am I willing to sacrifice? As soon as the minute that we do athletics, everybody's going to want to go, right? I mean, and that is, it's going to become, either way we look at it, an equity issue. Right. I know being a woman of color and families of color, that they have much more to lose than sending their kid to go play a sport. Because they know how that would have a significant impact on the child coming back home, living with grandparents, living with, parents with underlying conditions, how this can impact them. So in talking to parents and grandparents who are, families of color, who are really having to balance how this can significantly impact their families. And so, yeah, that is a choice that each and every one of us have to make. And so I just want us to really think about that. Like, it is not a decision based on our own individual self, but it is a decision that we have to make on all of our students and the impact that this will have on our school community. And so I want my kid to go back to school. She's struggling. And so I think many of our families and children are struggling, as we can hear today, have we heard today. But it's not an easy decision for us to make. And so if Jeremy, if you can give us just a yes, no, that would be really helpful for us. Yes.
I was trying to get that answer from the virus too, but it doesn't seem to be talking. And yes or no, and Gloria, I did hear from your daughter, and she's going to be part of our Read Your Heart Out that our athletes outreach is doing. But so she is still engaging with some of us, and that's great to hear from some of those things. In terms of a yes or no, we're going to find that, and we're going to figure out what that means.
Thank you so much, Gloria, and hope your baby feels well soon. And thank you for sharing your personal story with such vulnerability. My heart is aching with your story. Caruzi, and I see you, Schmidt, and Nikki first, but Schmidt after that. Caruzi.
Thank you, Ananda. Jeremy, thanks so much for being here tonight. In addition to thanking you, I really want to lift up our coaches who have worked so hard to provide virtual experiences to students and who are also reaching out to kids individually and making sure they're okay. That means the world, I know, to many, many parents, and I greatly appreciate that MMSD coaches care so deeply about their athletes. Echo what Chris Gomez-Schmidt said, and I think for many of our students, the sticking point here isn't like, wanting to be unsafe. The sticking point is hearing that, we're not going to do sports until we're back in school in person. And a lot of them are feeling a lot of despair that we're not going to be back in school in person for a while. And then when they hear that about sports, it just lowers their mood that much more. If we were to send our kids the message that we are going to see what's possible for spring sports and detach that from the decision to go back in person for actual in-person instruction, I think that would mean a lot to our students and our parents who are struggling and trying to figure out how to navigate through, we don't know how much longer until we get to go back to school in person. Chris has already said that, the Public Health Madison Dane County guidelines say that we can go back for low risk sports. I think we as a district have to decide what low risk means for us, given that we're a large district and a diverse district. But just saying we're not going to do it until we reopen schools is tough on kids. It just makes them feel hopeless. And as much as the virtual environment has been, I'm so grateful that coaches are providing that for kids. I have an athlete, and at the same time, I've never heard any of the students I know talk about virtual sports as a season. It just feels like more school in some ways, like you're seeing your friends on Zoom again. Going back in person, if we can find ways to do it that are safe, I think in terms of our students' mental health and well-being will make a world of difference, and also giving them some hope that this might be possible in the spring, regardless of our decision about in-person instruction. The decision to go back in person, again, if we look at the Dane County or the Public Health Madison Dane County metrics, we're not close to being able to go back in person at the high school level. But we do have permission from Public Health Madison-Dane County to start doing low risk sports in person. And I think for our kids to see that we're putting sports under the same lens as the very, necessarily rigorous lens for going back in school in person at the high school level is tough on kids. So I would really encourage us, as Chris said, to focus on what's possible and to send the message that we're going to try to be safe, we're going to try to be equitable, but we're also going to try to be flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to clarify, I think a lot of people are looking at that January statement, which was following Dr. Jenkins' announcement, where at this time we were going to follow the instructional model. And that really was referenced to winter sports. I think we're going to see another public health order come out, by February 8th. And I know I meet with them on February 11th, I think it is. And, I'll definitely probably get something out in February, kind of updating where we're at and what's next. I know, as we collaborate with the different sectors around the district, we want to make a collaborative decision, and I'm definitely gathering all this information. But in no way did I hope to convey from that statement in January that our alternate fall seasons were never going to be able to start in person, nor our spring seasons were going to start in person. It was just that at this time we're following our instructional model to hopefully make sure that we saw students stay engaged, because we are paralleling the way that we're, our instructional model with our sports delivery model. But we have not ruled out the fact that we could potentially return for fall, that alternate fall season, or that spring season, which is still, it seems like spring should get here really fast, but the first spring sport isn't able to start from a WI calendar standpoint until mid-April. So, you're definitely going to see regular updates and communication from athletics along with the rest of our sectors, I believe.
Thank you, Chris, for your question, your comments. One of the challenges, Nikki, I see you, one minute. One of the challenges at times of being in this board is the disproportionate way in which we experience something that is impacting everyone. And COVID is definitely highlighting a lot of that. And I hear your plea, Chris, around hope. My plea around hope is for our children to be alive. I've lost an aunt last month. I lost a dear friend last month. Lost, every week there are friends or people that I'm close to getting COVID. And I understand that the way in which we experience COVID racially is extremely different. I hear you want to keep hope to our children. I really sincerely want our staff know that my hope is that we keep our children alive, that no child gets COVID under our purview. That means in our buildings, that means in our fields, that means in any school district sponsored activity. And it's, I shared Gloria's comments. My daughter is struggling with mental health and all sort of things. Her father passed away last year. So there's so many things that are happening. Mm-hmm. But the way, I think what's important in this meeting and in the school board is that we are experiencing this very differently. And when I say we, I'm talking about people of color and white people. We are experiencing COVID very differently. The numbers are there to show that there's plenty of data and plenty of reports to say that. So my hope for my child, your child, and everyone's MMSD's children is for us to keep our children safe from COVID to the extent possible. And if that means that we're just gonna have to have like a lot of sacrifices, that we're doing that. Yeah, so I thank you for letting me use the privilege of the chair and to interrupt that. I think Nikki, you are next.
Yeah, as an individual with disabilities who originally his population wasn't even included on the graph because we were deemed not important enough to even be charted until a lawsuit occurred because the National Institute of Health deemed that the disabled weren't even worth lives weren't even worth categorizing. I have to say that people do experience it differently based on race, based on class, based on disability. Those are the facts, whether we want to admit it or not, they're there. I am all about votes normally. I'm all about democratic process 99.9% of the time. This is the one time I'm not. And the only time you may ever hear this out of my mouth. Carlton, I sent you a text saying people have asked me if we're going to vote on it. I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you what my answer is. I can't vote on someone's life. I won't. I can't. I don't know how to do that and justify that. I know that sounds rather dramatic, but to my community, these cases are death sentence. And that's something that I have to live with. That does not mean I disrespect either Chris. I respect your ideas. Heck, it's been heck over here because my father's a basketball coach saying you're speaking against athletics. That's normally an impeachable offense in my household. But it came down to this. People could die. People are going to die. I can't increase that. We've suffered enough as a society. I don't want our kids to go through that even more. I just can't do it.
And I think, Schmidt, you had your hand?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think this is a really emotional issue. It's really hard when we're talking about a pandemic and talking about keeping people safe, and people have different experiences, different perceptions of what keeps people safe and what we can do and what we shouldn't be doing. And, my question is if we don't do anything, does that mean no student is going to get COVID? It's just not, it's in the community. And what we have seen, if we're really talking about the science, is that the spread has not been from athletics that are done safely with all of the mitigation and safety strategies in place. The spread has been from the community. And so, yes, I will plead to our community to please wear your masks, to please do your distancing, to please not go to bars. Because we want our students back in school in person, and we want to be able to provide some of these experiences for our students that are safe. I also have a son who has COVID right now. He's away at college. He's isolating in a dorm. He's not feeling well, and it's a scary thing. But he got it from his roommate, and it's how you guys, there's no zero risk in this, and there's not going to be zero risk with COVID for a really long time. And so I would really encourage us, let's bring some epidemiologists back. Let's figure out how to look at the studies that are most relevant for when we're talking about athletics, and figure out, again, how we can talk to each other about what's possible, and looking towards the spring, I guess, and spring sports, because I just think it's, really important to figure out how to do this under the guidance of public health, and under the guidance of our medical experts. What they've said to us is that, they can provide the science, we're the policy makers and we make the decisions. But I really want us to keep an eye on that science, and how we figure this out together. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Anything else?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I do just want to point out to Chris's point as well. I did link in that presentation something from the American Medical Association, and also an article from the American Association of Pediatrics that I thought were pretty well balanced in terms of the science and scientific review. And I'll continue to do that and make sure the team has access to those sports specific things as we continue to work through it.
I appreciate that, Jeremy. And I guess I would just challenge us. I don't know if you could maybe report back to us, or if we could figure out a way to do this, if we could really categorize our sports as low, medium, and high risk, and then start talking to our coaches about what modifications they could do. I don't think anybody expects this to look like it did before the pandemic started. I don't think students expect that. I don't think parents expect that. But if we look around, there are sports going on all over this country, for better or for worse. Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools that are larger than us have been doing athletics throughout the year also. And yes, things have been canceled, but that's that's part of doing things safely. You cancel it when you need to in order to mitigate the risk. And so, yeah, just encourage us going forward to look at all the pieces of that.
Yeah, Dr. Jenkins?
Yeah, I'd just like to close with this. First of all, I would just like for everyone to know that we've heard everything that was said here tonight, and we've been working on this from every angle. There's not a decision made one way or the other. We're continuing to explore. I cannot thank Jeremy and the committee and all the individuals who are continuing to bring the thoughts to the table. I will say, so don't leave here tonight thinking that they're not looking at everything. We know the importance of students being engaged in co-curricular activities. The medical doctors, being that we brought them up, they said, let's look at reopening of schools. And that's where we are right now. But we also can do this as well, look at co-curricular participation. We're doing both. So let's not leave here thinking we're only doing one thing. We're going to do our due diligence to make sure that it's safe first. This is a health crisis. Mental health, social emotional well-being are very important. We're walking a fine line in the middle of a pandemic of having to do more than one thing at one time. So, but please don't leave here thinking we're only looking at this from one view. We may not arrive there as fast as people want us to arrive, but we're looking at it. And those students, when they spoke a moment ago, wow, powerful. And whatever we do too, we're modeling for them. And we're going to try as soon as we can, get our students back in school, get our students back participating. And I'm glad that it was acknowledged several times here. It doesn't mean that it's going to look the same way, but we're not done. We're going to keep doing that. So thank you for the time on the agenda, Ananda, and thank you to everyone for the time and attention given to this. This is a serious matter. Thank you.
I want to echo Dr. Jenkins' gratitude, Jeremy, to you and to your team. I think there is definitely not a consensus on how we are experiencing, definitely not how we are viewing and what we'd like to recommend. I really appreciate you doing all the review and the research to ensure that our students are the plan for transition back is accurate and it's informative. And please keep us informed and let us know if there's anything else that we needed to do. Do you have any other closing thoughts before?
Nope, just thank you for the time and the consideration, and I appreciate all the work all of us are doing to serve our students and do it safely and appropriately. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Please extend our gratitude to all the coaches as well. Thank you. Dr. Jenkins?
I'm sorry, I'm going to turn it over at this time to Lisa. I'll continue with the agenda and I'll have to step out for a second and I'll be right back. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. At this time, I'd like to call on our chiefs of elementary schools. Excuse me. They have done some site visits to some surrounding districts and took a look at some of the instructional models that they saw. And we actually had a chance today to do some processing and to do some learning, right? We want to really look at what other districts are doing and then think about what some of the good things are and the promising practices are that we can bring back. And also identify maybe the why things are happening in some districts and maybe they're happening in a different way here. So I'm going to turn it over to Carletra to start that off, and then Tremaine will join in as well.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here and to be able to report out on some of the visits that we have been able to take to other districts. Again, as Lisa said, to learn from some of the things that they have done and some of the strategies that they have implemented as they have gone back to face-to-face instruction. We were particularly interested in the safety measures that they've put in place, the instructional strategies, and then also how they are addressing the social emotional well-being of staff and students when they re-enter back in. The team has had a chance to visit Sun Prairie and Verona, Sauk Prairie, in which MTI President Andy Wadey was also able to join us. and most recently Wanakee. And so the middle or the secondary team is also visiting schools at this time as well. So it's not just elementary that is visiting different districts. So the themes that we saw across the districts relative to safety measures was the intentionality around teaching students routines and procedures. It was evident during our visits that time had been spent with modeling and having explicit teaching with students once they returned, but also in parent communication as to what can be done to prepare students for face-to-face instruction. So that intentional work that was done for safety protocols and mitigation efforts confirmed for us specifically the need for that 2-week phase-in period for each grade level to ensure that those practices were in place. So that was one of the things that we were able to really get affirmed from those visits that we took. The first week of face-to-face instruction was dedicated to systems and teaching, modeling, and having students practice routines, as I said before. So, and even relationship building itself looked different and needed to be practiced specifically with our younger students. So things that we have taken for granted, such as just being able to see someone smile. They really did some intentional teaching around, like, how do you smile with your eyes? How do you let someone know that you appreciate what they're doing? You know, what does an air high five look like? So those are just some things that you don't really think about when you are returning back in person, but it's really important, especially again for our younger kids. We also wanted to look at some themes across what they're doing for their instructional model. And so one difference that we have for us here in MMSD is that the schools that we have visited all have the hybrid model and use the AB cohorts, which is something that we are not doing for MMSD at this time, but something that we are continuing to look at. So while Sauk Prairie did select a hybrid with concurrent teaching, which is what we have landed on for MMSD, concurrent teaching, it was for their 3rd grade and up. So the decision was made, and again, this is just Sauk Prairie, to have the 4K through 2nd grade primary students have in-person teachers and virtual teachers rather than do concurrent instruction. So we just wanted to, when looking at that, keep in mind that they are a smaller district that has 4 elementary schools. So they were able to create a virtual academy. And so what they have done is they're actually sharing their teachers across buildings, so that you might have a 1st grade teacher that's teaching virtually, but she would have students from, or she or he would have students from any of the elementary schools to make up that class. For teachers that were implementing the concurrent model, we also talked to them about some of the challenges with that. And they talked through that, but they did say that while it was challenging to begin with, once they started going and learning what needed to happen, things got better. And it's what they're doing right now, and they're not having as many challenges with it as at this time. Collaboration was also key to the success of phasing back into face-to-face. So from their school-based leadership teams to grade level teams, there needs to be dedicated time for teachers and all staff to collaborate. And they said that that was essential, but it was also one of the most challenging things for them to schedule. Outside of the instructional model and operational pieces, we also wanted to know about the work that was done related to social and emotional well-being of students. Again, this is speaking from the Sauk Prairie model. So at the elementary level, morning meetings are required, and it's something that we already have in place here in MMSD. So that was something that was great to hear. At the middle school level, they actually developed a course. It was a social emotional learning course that every middle school student would need to take for 6 weeks. And at the high school level, there is intentionality around adding an additional 20 minutes to the first period class, where they had structured lessons for social emotional learning, but also lessons that the students helped to develop. And so we recognize that, and these are just some of the themes that we saw, again, across the schools that we were able to visit. And we recognize that as a district, we have a larger lift just due to the number of schools that we have, and also the number of students that will be phasing in when a decision is made for us to return. but we also recognize the great opportunity that we have in learning from other districts by speaking with the teachers, principals, and in some cases as well, the superintendents, as to the lessons that they've learned as they've implemented face-to-face, the challenges, but also, again, the opportunities that have been presented and thinking of things differently when we're not going back to the old way of doing instruction and doing school in general. But I will just say that most importantly, the environments in the buildings that we had the opportunity to visit were very welcoming. The students were very happy, and it was a very joyful place. And so that was great to be able to see as well. Dr. Clarity, was there anything you wanted to add?
Carlucci, again, another magnificent job. And I will be remiss if I try to go over the themes that you did again, because you covered them so thoroughly. So thank you for that. I think what I would do is just reinforce those key points that we noticed within our visits. First of those being, and the most important, I think, just being the modeling and remodeling and reteaching for our students, and having that reiterated time and time again in settings that traditionally we didn't always have that reteaching happen. From the time a student leaves a car or a bus, just navigating their entry into a doorway, we noticed having staff available and just modeling and just what the next expectation will be as a student navigated their way through the building. For instance, as you get to the door, you're going to sanitize with a reminder. As you leave the door, you're going to go to this specific hallway and navigate that highway. There'll be a washing station here on your left, and you'll have an opportunity to wash your hands at this station. Your materials will go here, and they'll be there for the day. So just that reiteration of the mitigation efforts and safety protocols, and then the very intentional modeling of that over and over again was very necessary, but it also was very inviting because both students and staff want to do everything they can to be safe. And you saw that mutual respect that we're going to do everything possible so we can reestablish education in the building setting. To the instructional points that you covered wonderfully, Carletra, again, we do know that the concurrent model that we're proposing would not be the hybrid, and most of those that we've seen have been the hybrid. But the things that we would lift up is first, it is a possible solution, and I think it's something that with practice we would get better with over and over again. Teachers that did it said, the first time I just had to learn basically where to stand and how to navigate both the students behind me or that are engaging virtually and having students in front of me. Body positioning, where my voice projects, but each time they did it, they got better and better. And now they're, with anything we do, they're feeling more comfortable. So I'd like to thank our staff for the opportunity to visit those schools and those schools that we went to for entrusting us in their environments. And if there's anything else from the team that we can, we're not clear about, we were happy to answer those questions. But thanks, Carletra, you did a wonderful job covering those themes.
Thank you, Dr. Clarity. I also just wanted to add that for us as a district, the communications team is working on videos as well for parents so that they would see what it looked like a day in the life of a student. And then elementary leaders are also working on videos so that it's specific to their school with their different entrances and with the classrooms. And in some cases, they've even had the school mascot is the one that's actually doing the tour of the building. So it's a lot of great work that leaders that are doing right now in collaboration with each other and again with other districts and preparing for when we will return. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carletra and Tremaine. Lisa, do you have anything else that you want to highlight before we open up?
No, I don't think that I do. I think that Carletra and Tremaine really did a great job of giving the themes, right? And the learnings that they had across multiple site visits. And then also some specifics about how we can support teachers as they move forward into this model if and when we reopen.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna do a round robin. Julia, if you don't mind, I'm gonna start with you, and then Nikki, you're next. Do you have any questions, Julia?
I'm kind of still thinking, can someone else go first and then I'll go in a minute?
Okay, great. Nikki?
Yes, my question is, have they figured out strategies for 4K and 5-year-olds on wearing masks? Because no offense, I would love to know how they do it and how to reinforce that in a positive manner.
Again, with what we talked about previously and just talking with the principals, it was really about practice, and not just practice when the students got to school, but also giving parents those tools to practice with their students before they even returned. So it was just a lot of practice, a lot of modeling that they did.
And I'm kind of looking forward to the East mascot wearing the mask and giving the tour. Kind of think that'd look cool.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm gonna go in order that at some point you were all on my screen. So Schmidt, Ali, Carusi, and Savian.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for all the work that I know is going into planning all the complex logistics of bringing kids back to school and doing that safely. I guess one of my questions is, as we look at this and figure out, you know, the virtual learning and the in-person learning split that schools have done, and knowing that, you know, based on our last survey, that we're probably going to have families that want their students back in person and families that want to stay virtual for the rest of the year. Do we see ourselves doing that virtual academy at the early grades and then doing the in-person the way you described one of those school districts is doing that? And then I guess I would ask, what is the timeline for surveying families again, so we have an indication of what families are thinking they want, and how do we communicate to them what our model is so that they know what they're choosing?
So kind of going backwards order, I think you had like 5 questions in there.
Yeah,
so,
sorry.
We've communicated that the concurrent 4-day-a-week model is the model that when and if there's a decision to go back to school, that would be that's what it would look like. So to Carletra's point earlier, I think it's a matter of getting those visuals to parents so they can ask, so what does this actually look like? I know I hear the word concurrent and I hear 4 days a week, but if we want to put videos on the screen so they can actually visualize their child in that setting, which we have those that we've shared with leaders, and I think it's just a matter of getting those out to the wider community so you have those optics in play. Can you kind of go reverse order? After concurrent, there was what?
I guess getting that timeline on getting that information to families so then we can do the survey to find out how many want to stay virtual versus in person.
So we know that the best actually family interaction comes from the school staff themselves and the school leaders and their teams directly to the families, so that they're engaging in that work right now. That's where you're going to get this feel of whether you're coming back or not. There will be another district survey. I don't have the exact date. I apologize, Lisa, for that. Unless Lisa has it, but the responses that we're getting or the engagement that we're getting has been ongoing. That's part of a principal and their return teams, specifically reading out to families, intentionality with families that may not have responded to surveys in the past, and getting that information so you know family by family and also grade level by grade level who to expect back in those in our spaces. So while we do appreciate that we have overall district survey, there's nothing better than the personal touch that we get from our buildings to those families.
I guess the last question I have is just a general, more larger district level systems question about if we're, looking at the metrics and those reopening metrics that we have on our website and updating those. I'm encouraged to see that a lot more of those are green, both in our planning and in, the percent positive in Dane County going down. Hopefully we're on a downward trend in the number of overall cases. So when will we see that update to all of those like reopening planning metrics so that we know where we're at?
Yeah, we're working on doing the update. Each week we get the updated data from public health of Madison and Dane County, and again, a lot of positive things in terms of the reduction in the number of cases and the positivity rate. And so we'll be working to get that update done. And so we anticipate that that we'll get an update this week.
Thank you.
Ali and Karuzi.
Yeah, I have emphasized this a few times when we've talked about kind of what the return to school looks like, but particularly for our elementary school students. So really talking about how we're incorporating the outdoors and how we're incorporating play-based learning. The other thing is as I hear you speak to kind of adding time and places, I think about the intensity of how we schedule instructional time for elementary schools, which is not, it is not an area in which we have a ton of extra time to do new stuff or to have new approaches, right? We are really scheduled pretty intensively. So do we have a sense of DPI relaxing standards around what instructional time looks like or how we utilize instructional time? And the other thing I think I wanted to speak to or hear you all speak to is how we will incorporate and utilize the arts for early childhood as a way to allow students to have a greater range of expression and maybe emphasize play-based learning again within those areas.
Lisa, do you want to take the DPI one and then I can?
Sure, yeah. Ali, thank you for the question. We do have the waiver for instructional minutes from DPI. So we do have quite a bit of flexibility in that area as well. And we actually just had a little bit of a conversation today about specials and the arts because Carletra and Tremaine did see some things, some different models around that moving forward. And I do think what you said, Ali, about, minute by minute, this bell to bell instruction in middle schools or in elementary schools is exhausting. I was there for 11 years and I saw right from the minute a child gets off the bus, where they go, what they do, how they walk, when they open their locker, all of that, right? I'm not sure all of that was great for anyone. So as we go back, we want to really think about how to invest in our children differently, in the time that they're going to need to build relationships, to learn school, right? We have kinders and first graders who have never been in a building. And that's going to take a lot of time. And that's what we have to really lean in on first. If anyone, and we have to say this over and over again, if anyone thinks that those little ones are coming back to us and launching right into literacy and math and learning and paper pencil tasks, they would be mistaken, right? There are a lot of other social and emotional and ways that we all need to collectively come together again, appropriately socially distanced, of course. But I do think that those are certainly our first priorities coming back. Carletra, I'll send it off to you.
And just to add, Ali, that was a really great question around the arts. And so we are in the process of scheduling a meeting with Peter to think through what specials will look like, as well as how we will think differently around what we are offering for fine arts instruction in elementary. And thinking about the other districts, some of them are we have right now, virtual specials will be virtual. And some of the other districts that we did have the opportunity to visit, they do have face-to-face instruction with specials. So their art teacher was right there with the students in face-to-face instruction with them. So, and they did have Phi-Ed class. And so we're gonna go back and look at that. We had some conversation with Sally today around what are the health and safety measures that we have to keep in mind if we're thinking about doing our special schedule differently. Leaders are really taking to heart, again, the outdoor opportunities and putting that into the schedule with recess, also with an additional break time, and then doing as much outdoor learning as Madison weather permits, that would be possible for students. So yes.
Carletra, thank you so much for speaking to that. And also thank you for speaking to how specials may need to be adjusted. Because I think a lot of us think about a teacher with maybe 15 kids or a teacher with 24 kids. And we don't always think about an art teacher who sees an entire school, or a string teacher who works with 60 kids in a day, and the difference in exposure for that person or that educator. The other thing I want to say is, Lisa, as you have have guided us through this experience, through this pandemic. One of the most invigorating parts of these conversations has been listening to you talk about a new normal, right? Talking about things that did not work before this and that we have the opportunity to shift away from moving forward. And that has been so truly inspired. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about feeling an abundance of flexibility around instruction time at the elementary level. You're the first person in my 13 years of working in education to use that term in regards to that specific narrative and approach to education. So I hope that we take the opportunities where they are and run with them. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness of your answers.
Thank you, Ali. I learned something today. I will add, I read an article that was forwarded to me today, and it talked about the time that we're in, and it talked about how we should be reframing this as schooling loss, not learning loss. Because learning loss implies that the only place learning can happen is at a school. And our children learn in all different kinds of places. On the playground, Carletra said, on the playground, in the hallways, in outdoor spaces. And that really struck me today in thinking about that. And I would definitely want to share these articles with you, but it really starts from a positive rather than a deficit mindset. And it really taught me a lot. So I'll be sharing that. And I think that speaks to Ali, this notion of, right, getting outside, learning from other people, other places, and not assuming that the only learning that happens is on Lexia or on Dreambox or on, what might happen during another portion of the day. So it was just a really a good reminder and good learning for me, even after all these years in education, to think differently. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you, Ali, for your question. Caruzi, Savian, and Gloria, and then we're gonna wrap up.
So I'm really grateful for this conversation. Ali, thank you so much for bringing up outdoor education. And I just want to reiterate that if we're talking about a new normal, outdoor learning is, of course, a way for us to deal with COVID, and COVID is going to be with us for a while. So I think we need to be thinking not just this spring, but into the next school year. How do we use the outdoors to keep our kids safe as we return to school? And also, how do we use outdoor learning as just a way to rethink what's normal? And, as you said, Lisa, like get rid of the bell-to-bell learning experience that our kids, especially in elementary school, are having, and start to use the outdoors, not as, oh, we're taking time away from instructional minutes, but let's get our instructional minutes outdoors. Let's make it work. So thank you so much, Ali, for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. I also want to express gratitude to Carletra and Tremaine for the site visits to other schools. That's just fantastic. I love that you're doing it. And I really, really appreciate the report to the board about what you learned. Super helpful. I think it's really helpful for the public to hear as well what you're seeing in other districts. Back when we did our first survey, a piece of feedback I heard particularly from elementary parents was that it was very, very difficult to answer that survey without knowing what the instructional model looked like. It was hard to say if you'd send your child back to school without knowing what the school day was going to look like, without knowing what the classroom was going to look like. I think one concern that parents have is that, what happens if a lot of parents say they want their kids to go back in person? Are they going to have to tell some kids they can't go because there's not room in the classroom for them? Are kids going to get put in rooms with new teachers because there might be an imbalance of kids who want to go back in person from room to room? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty on the part of parents at that level of detail that we need to be able to communicate so that people feel secure and comfortable making a decision about whether to keep their child virtual or send them back to school in person. So the more detail we can express about even things like, I know my kid's classroom or my kid's school has, 2 to 4 kids at a desk. How are we going to mitigate the risk of exposure in situations where we don't have individual desks for children? The more we can communicate about not only what we've done to mitigate air quality concerns, but also to test to make sure those mitigations are working. I think parents are going to feel safer about this, and our staff are going to feel safer about going back. So it'd be really great to get an update at some point about things like air quality and how we're communicating to parents the details of what the instructional model and the school day is going to look like, and how we're communicating to staff about how we're going to keep them safe. The couple questions I have, one is actually just one question at this point because of what other people have already asked. I do have a question about vaccination for our teachers. Staff vaccination is a game changer. And at first, we heard that our staff were going to be in group 1B for vaccination, and we thought that was going to happen fairly soon. And then we heard last week that it may not happen until March 1st. Is it possible that that might get sped up with the new administration in Washington? And what are we going to be doing to keep our staff safe as we're looking at reentry and the possibility that we won't have a vaccine, vaccination starting in February and, with second doses in March?
I think I'll speak to that. First of all, that's one of the factors that we were also considering when you look at, even on our dashboard, we're saying we want everything to be completely safe. With our staff, vaccinations, we didn't have any idea that it may come as soon as it's supposed to be coming right now. So we were planning without that. And I want to remind everyone, we do have staff back right now. All of our students, special needs students who are needing to receive services, our MSCR, we have staff there, and we've learned a lot from MSCR in terms of how to do some of the mitigating strategies, which, that's one of the main things you've heard Dr. Fauci say. Am I breaking up at all?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so one of the things I was saying that we put all these mitigating strategies in place to keep staff safe. The vaccination, I don't know if you heard that part. That wasn't a part of when we were looking at how we go about reopening school. It will be a game changer. I totally agree with you. We're supposed to have that done by March 1st. One of the things to remember, we said, as we plan to reopen, we will give significant notice to everyone, a 3 weeks minimum. And what we're also trying to do to make sure that staff is safe and aware of all the best practices, we will bring our staff back in before we bring our students back in. We had a conversation the other day with MSCR talking about how we release some of the classrooms. So we got to talk around it. And in this conversation, in our internal advisory, we have everyone there with us, administrators, APP, we have MTI, all of us are talking about it together. We know that safety is going to be our main thing. At this point, if we said today, we're headed back to school, know this, it would be holding to our commitment of a 3 weeks notice. So we can't get back to school. So realistically, we have our update on our measurements next week. By then, we'll know whether or not we've actually met that 4 weeks in a row downward trend. I think someone mentioned that a little bit earlier. So right after that, we're having our discussions about what does it look like for us. Even if it's next week, then you look out 3 weeks, about approximately bringing the teachers back in the buildings before the students, it would actually wind up being just beyond that March 1st deadline. And so hopefully then we would also have the vaccines as well. But if the vaccines are not there, that wouldn't be just a total, non-conversation starter about how we transition back in. But we know that the vaccines are too going to be very important for us.
Can I ask Carlton a question? Chair, may I ask
Nikki,
Carl?
hold on one second, Nikki. Gloria hasn't asked a question yet, but I just want to make sure. And then Sabian either. Yeah, and Sabian either.
Sabian.
So I'll get to you, Nikki, and then you will be the last person.
Perfect. That's fine.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sabian.
Thank you so much, Lisa, Tremaine, and Carletra, for taking on this huge undertaking, and Dr. Jenkins. I guess I have two broader questions. Is the phase reopening, it's a heavy lift logistically. I can only imagine for working parents. So I'm curious, what flexibility will each school community have to make sure their phased schedule can also fit the needs of working parents' schedules? And then my second question is, there's going to be a lot of residual mental health and social emotional effects of this extended period of, quarantine and isolation and virtual learning. What do we have in place, or will we need to have in place to make sure our kids are, getting the mental health support they will need once we go back, especially for, our young students?
It's going to be significant. Right now, our plans during virtual are to continue to focus on the social emotional, the mental health piece of it. And I have to give it to Jay and his department. Everything from our counselors, our social workers, our nurses, our entire staff, the teachers, everyone, we know that we have to pay attention when we initially come back to transition. There's a lot of anxiety for a number of students who are coming back, a lot of parents who want to send their children back, but they're very concerned about that social emotional piece. So we know that we have to pay a lot of attention to having our students back safely, and safely is meaning the social emotional and the mental health piece of it. And I just say again, our team, we're very conscientious about that particular piece of it. And the phase regarding the grade span, how we talked about it initially, we're still having conversations, because I have heard from some parents saying, hey, you want to go K first, and then my second graders at home. And if all conditions and everything is better, we have the vaccination, we have all these other things together, that's another conversation. But we have to continue, we're going to have to continue to work on what we can do, because some things may be accelerated further than what we thought they were going to be, but we still have to be cautious at the same time. We have learned a lot. Things have changed since we first started this. We've learned a lot from MSCR. Right now, as it stands, we're looking at the science around it. Some of that's changed, but we do know everything is concentrated on the youngest learners at this particular point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just know from experience about kind of the logistical barriers that partial day 4K is to some parents in terms of
Right.
making that work for their schedule. And so something that Ali mentioned and Carletra mentioned was an abundance of flexibility.
Right. Most definitely. Thank you for raising that, though.
Thank you, Savian. Gloria?
I don't have anything right now. I'll pass it on to, yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Nikki. You close us up.
I appreciate. Sorry to cut Savian off. I was in outer space. Sorry about that. But my question is heard a lot at MSCR Cares, and whether a lot on vaccines with MSCR Cares, and if they're scheduled 1B or 1C, will we get information on who is in what group when you know it?
Yes, most definitely, as we're reporting out. And I also encourage everyone to look at our ops meetings that we're having. We're having these discussions in terms of how things are rolling out, and Jay gives a report about where we are. But I will definitely send that to you in terms of who's in which particular group, and so that you all can have that. All of that's a part of it, though. That's a great question too, Nick.
Really appreciate that. And this may be inappropriate, so I have to ask it carefully. How did Mercy Health manage to get the vaccine and vaccinate people before we did?
I don't know about the appropriateness of the question, but I could tell you there's a lot of discussion about how things are happening from the federal level, from the state level, down to the health department level. But I can tell you, as superintendents in the region, we're working together at this point and listening to the Department of Health. And I think it's new guidance coming in right now that's pretty much trying to give some sense of order to where we are, because the doses are not in at the degree in which we need it for everyone right now. So that's kind of where we are.
All right. Just curious. I did want to break any rules.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for addressing those final questions. I have a question for either Tremaine or Carletra around if you can talk a little bit about like the curriculum adaptation for like, what is the accessibility for curriculum for K-12 or pre-K, pre-K2? And then how are we, what's our thinking around discipline, not disciplining, but discipline?
So we will continue to follow the scopes as they have been set out for elementary as we move forward, even when we go back face to face. The CNI department is continuing to look at that and to work on if any adjustments need to be made. And so they'll be doing that. As far as you said the discipline aspect?
Discipline. Mm-hmm.
The discipline aspect.
And so the board really stepped up and took under advisement.
I don't know where that's coming from. Go ahead, Tremaine.
I think Dr. Tremaine is in two places at the same time.
Oh.
That's all right.
So we are still working on the discipline aspect as far as if, again, there'll be any adjustments made to that for when we return face to face.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kalatra, and thank you so much, Tremaine, for the great work and for going on the field trip to other districts and collecting all that information. We're looking forward to hear more of your learnings and what's exciting. What's exciting about what you're learning from other districts and what's exciting about what we could implement. I'm gonna get a moment for Dr. Jenkins or Lisa to get any final words.
Yes, let me just say, first of all, thank you again, Ananda, for continuing to put this about our reopening and what's happening with the whole thing with our schools and just some of the work behind the scene. I think it's good to have it here at the instructional meeting. It's good for the public to hear it as well. And I can't thank our team enough. It has been a team effort all throughout. And I really appreciate the fact of how Lisa has just personally engaged everybody in this work, the work that the chiefs are doing themselves, but our teachers, MTI being at the table, the principal groups being at the table, all of us, our medical advisors, we have absolutely the best. And they have different viewpoints. And I want to thank them publicly for the guidance they're giving us. And also Dr. Demiri is reaching out and grabbing some of his colleagues of color to participate as we move forward in our guidance. That's huge to the work, as I've heard parents raise different questions and wanted to hear from experts too, who are of color as well in this. And so I thank you for your patience with us in this. And we're in this together. We're going to get through it, you guys. I'm really excited. We will get through this together and it will not look the same. Thank you, Lisa, for continuing to raise that. We will meet the needs of our students and have more students being successful. Lisa.
Thank you.
Oh.
Anything else, Lisa, before we wrap to the next item?
No, I think that was an important wrap up. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for that portion of the meeting. And Ananda, if you're ready and give me the thumbs up, we could move on.
Yeah, I'm trying to instill a practice of at least a 5 minutes break within the 2 hours, and we reached that mark. So how about we come back at 7:15 and ready to go, Lisa?
Thank you.
Thank you, Barb, for putting that slide. I keep forgetting to ask you what's the best way to do that.
No problem.
If we have everybody, we can get started, Lisa.
We're ready when you are, Lisa.
Thank you, Ananda. So our final portion of the meeting tonight is to talk a little bit about our BEP update and what is happening currently in a virtual environment. I am going to turn it over to Bryn in just a minute, but I first want to frame the presentation a little bit so that we can sort of calibrate on expectations. So Bryn and her team have put together a very informative presentation. Bryn is not going to be reading through every single slide. She's going to be giving you the highlights on what is most important. She'll talk for about 10 minutes. Nikki, I see you nodding. I'm hoping that's an affirmation here of what we're saying. Thank you. So Bryn's going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then we will open it up to have a focused discussion. So I want to thank Bryn and her team, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. And Barb, were you going to screen share with the slides?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Great. So thank you so much for having us here. We will stay focused as we go through these, and obviously you have the whole deck to review when you have the time. I'll do my best in the short time to represent some of this work that represents so many people's work across our department in our district. And I do have, and Jay is here as well, and a few members of our team, Rochelle Stone, Sarah Knievy, and Lana Stoltzfus, if questions come up at the end that they can help answer. So we can go to the next slide.
Bryn, you're cutting out just a tad.
Oh, okay. I could be more forceful with my voice. Okay. All right. So this is just simply a quick reminder that there was a BEP weekly update in December. This is obviously not a typical year, so this is not the typical mid-year update. There is a final slide at the end of this presentation that has a number of links in it. So I just will mention that where there are links there. We're going to highlight some of our work during virtual, how we've adapted during virtual to continue focusing on how do we create a sense of safety and belonging for everyone in our schools during this time, what that looks like, and then how we're using this time to plan to come back differently. The next slide has a framing quote and simply a reminder that we need to keep vision in mind of where we want to go.
Bryn, you're chopping up a little bit.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll just put in my headphones. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. All right, is that better?
Much better, much better. Yep, thank you.
Oh, yay. Okay, great. All right, so now we can go next to the outcomes and we'll just get right past these. These obviously relate to our BEP goals, and we'll go right into the next slide. We wanted to include this slide as a reminder these goals and guiding principles have remained constant over time in the BEP. In our work at the district level and internally and with schools, we've really been digging into these, making meaning of these principles, making sure our policy and practice is aligned with these principles, and looking at how they really come to life in schools and in classrooms. Our next slide highlights the foundational practices, and we'll highlight some of our CEL and RJ work in this presentation, but what's key is that all these foundational practices are interconnected and interrelated. They're all essential for creating classrooms and schools where all students feel safe, feel a sense of belonging, where joyful and engaged learning can occur. Cynthia Moore and Sarah Kenevi, along with the rest of our Universal Systems coaches, work directly with schools on how they're implementing these foundational practices, offering support, and obviously there's so much amazing work going on in our schools. We go to the next slide, which will highlight just some of how social emotional learning is critical more now than ever during virtual. It's been a focus to say, let's make sure that we get our relationships and our care for each other right during this time. Let's make sure students, staff, and families feel seen and loved during this incredibly difficult time. On the next slide, we have an overall framework for CEL and MMSD. Just want to point out that this embodies a transformational definition of CEL. And hopefully you have time to read this through and really engage with this and where our district's going with CEL. This slide is to point out one piece of how this work is coming to life during virtual. So the district's been providing CEL lessons for elementary teachers to use. This is the product of collaboration and significant work by many, many people, including classroom teachers. And also wanting to point out this framework. This is grounded in research from the Aspen Institute and really talking about how CEL can come alive in schools. And we're using this to ground our work as well. And this next slide, again, I just want to point out at the slide at the very end of this presentation, there are links. So you can look at some specific examples of how high schools are implementing these strategies, these key CEL strategies, and how they're coming to life in virtual learning. And looking forward, where are we going with CEL? There's some amazing work going on in our district and in schools in terms of taking this transformational lens centered on student identities and youth voice. And now, so that's sort of highlighting the CEL piece. Again, it's interrelated with all of those foundational practices. Now highlighting some of the restorative justice work. Again, it is all interrelated and essential. Lana and Rochelle, as I pointed out, are here as well for questions at the end. if needed. And just want to highlight this definition. It is expansive. It is explicitly anti-racist. This is a way of being. This is not a one-off practice. And we've included the graphic here as well of Maisha Wynn's, the 5 pedagogical stances that Maisha Wynn offers for engaging in restorative justice work in education. And that grounds much of our work. Again, this also captures that restorative justice, restorative approaches are a worldview and grounded in community relationships and connection. We have key community partnerships in doing the restorative justice work in MMSD. So this slide is here to highlight the work of Dane County Time Bank. And our next slide highlights the work of another key partner, the YWCA. This highlights the work that the Y is doing embedded in our MMSD schools. And then next slide highlights the Y's work on related to our district level work as well. And this highlights the work, the restorative justice work going on at the district level and that direct work with schools. And obviously there's also so much going on in schools. So this highlights here opportunities for learning and growth as well as direct support and that collaboration with our community partners. As the board heard last Monday, some of the recommendations coming out of the Safety and Security Ad Hoc Committee relate to restorative justice. So mentioning here, highlighting a couple of those key recommendations that are coming out of that process that relate to the restorative justice work and where we can go with this work looking forward. And now sort of shifting gears to where are we going with goal 3 in the BEP and addressing exclusionary discipline. Want to highlight again that this goal has been here in the BEP. We know that we are not where we need to be. Reducing disproportionality in the use of exclusionary practices, including suspensions for African-American students and students with disabilities. During virtual, this is a very short update because we are not using exclusionary practices during virtual. Schools are supporting families, reaching out, supporting students as needed when things come up during virtual. What we're really trying to do is use this time to prepare for return. Samaje Skonye is a key partner with me in this work. She is the BEA Universal Support Coach, and she and I have really, along with many others across the district and in our schools, trying to take this time to look at how we can approach behavior response and exclusionary discipline differently. And that work is grounded in research, and there are links to some of those key resources in that slide at the end of this presentation. And really we're grounding in our MMSD values and those guiding principles in the BEP. And I have highlighted one of those key guiding MMSD values here that we have really been looking at how are we making meaning of this value as it relates to exclusionary discipline. I wanted to point out and share out with the board a district behavior education team that Samaje and I are co-leading along with Jocelyn Lipinski, who is developmental design trainer and universal systems coach. They both bring perspectives grounded having worked in our schools, Samaje as a BEA, Jocelyn as a teacher. We are connecting with departments across at the district level and really coming together to make meaning of our values and principles, do deep mindset work ourselves, look at what needs to happen throughout the district, looking at practice and data across the district. We're having really taking a meaningful look at what does true accountability mean in the context of exclusionary discipline, and how do we reimagine our use of exclusionary discipline? How do we talk about what accountability can mean through a restorative and transformative lens at a student, adult, and system level? Again, this alternatives to suspension work, the board is obviously aware this was added to the BEP for 1920.
what I want to highlight is, again, this ties back into what does accountability really mean? How do we meaningfully respond when things come up in our schools? We're learning a lot from schools about what works and where they want to go and their vision. So much gratitude for all the time of school staff who engage with us in this work. We're working on creating additional templates for alternatives to suspension and including a restorative approach to student-staff conflict, which I'll speak to in the next slide. So this is work that Samaje, myself, Lana, Rochelle, and Bill Balden, who is also with the Y and MMSD, have pulled together a cohort of school staff across our district, across levels, across roles, principals, social workers, so many other different roles, engaging together in monthly meetings to do this work. You can see the overall purpose here, and we're really digging into that mindset work. We know that we cannot underestimate the mindset work that needs to be done, and really holding that vision of viewing conflict and difficulties not just as something to get through, but an opportunity to address underlying needs, transform our relationships and school communities. And one outcome of this will be a template alternative to suspension plan for use when we return in person, so that specifically can address those behaviors that are labeled as swearing at staff, so that we can have meaningful ways of addressing that. And final 2 slides here, just to highlight also the work that we're doing in terms of BEP guidance, which has obviously been ongoing, and collaboration with schools, and highlighting these values that have been guiding our work as we work with schools, support schools in terms of planning for return. How do we return differently? That importance of all roles working together, that importance of everyone sharing that value of keeping students in class at the center, addressing relationships and adult mindsets as well. We can go to the next one. And then thinking about next steps. We know that especially in this area, building trust is critical, and that trust has to be earned through action. And we are looking at ways to enhance family and student voice. We have ongoing ways that we're listening to the experience of students impacted by exclusionary discipline, getting their input. We're looking at ways to enhance that, including, this also relates to one of the recommendations of the Safety and Security Ad Hoc about a discipline advisory group that would be made up of families, students, community members. And then action planning, that relates back to all of the slides really, and that district behavior education team. And again, there's a link at the end that talks about the action planning guide. That's really a wonderful resource. And so we are grounding our action planning in research. We are rooted in anti-racism, and the board would see any policy changes if they are needed, that we would bring those to the board in May. And I will now pause for questions and discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Bryn. Barb, whenever you can stop the screen sharing. Because we had a pretty robust conversation on the BAP last year, what I'm hoping to do, and because it's really late, is for us to just do a round robin, and if folks can refrain from pontificating on and just really asking the direct question to Bryn, it will be really helpful to expedite our last part of our meeting. So Nikki, you go first, and then Ali, Peruzzi, Sadian, Julia, Gloria, and Schmidt.
On the alternatives to suspension, I think that's excellent. I like the alternatives to suspension expulsion. Is there a way to ever do an alternatives to seclusion and restraint? Right now, we seclude a large number of our elementary school students. Is there a way to create a system where seclusion restraint is, I know they say it's only in emergency situations, but it's still occurring larger than it should? Is there a way to create a system, or is that asking too much? That's my first question. My second question would be on an alternative to suspension for African American students and Latino students. Absolutely, we need to do that. We have some of the worst outcomes, and that's unacceptable. I also would like students with disabilities to go with goal 3, just to make sure that oftentimes after, not just after seclusion restraint, but oftentimes when once the child has been removed from school, they don't always come back. And I just want to make sure all groups have that. I hope that makes sense. And that was as quick as I could talk, Nanda.
Ananda, do you want me to answer right after each one?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. Great, thank you so much, Nikki. And I will take the seclusion and restraint question back to others in our department who have more expertise, but thank you for that question. And then as far as alternative suspension, thank you for the opportunity to clarify. Those are plans that schools adopt that they will offer to any student who engages in a behavior that would fall at a level 3. And so we really are, it should make an impact in our rates of disproportionality, but it is a approach that schools adopt to say, when this behavior occurs, here's the meaningful way we are going to respond that will not involve suspension. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Ali?
Yeah, I think this is a complex conversation, and a conversation that is deeply racially charged, given the fact that the BEP up until last year, indicated over and over again consistently that African American students were punished more frequently than any other group of students, and were punished more severely than any other group of students. And so I think how we address that, and the different facets of how we address that, are something that are worth our time and energy at this moment. So I'll start by saying that. The second thing I want to speak to is the role of trauma in terms of looking at how we intervene around behavior, especially coming back from a global pandemic in which children have lost loved ones and have spent time in isolation. And for some of our students have just seen their families struggle to make their basic needs, have struggled to have stable housing and food, and how we want to address the needs of those students without passing judgment on the character of a child as they navigate that complexity. I want to speak to the benefits of exclusionary practices. Bryn, we talked about this last year. I'm like, if there's something I'm missing about how we suspend kids and then they come back and they're straight A students and things just get better and better from them right after that expulsion or right after that suspension, I want to see that data. Because my understanding is that suspension doesn't increase engagement. It doesn't increase a student's sense of belonging. It doesn't resolve conflict within the classroom. In fact, it can contribute. And so if you have different information, I'd love to hear that. I think looking to what Nikki was saying and emphasizing the different ways that students are restrained, secluded, excluded, practices around having kids tag out, and also the levels of discipline that we see kids getting involved in the most frequently. So when our students are suspended, why? When our students are removed from class, why? And how have those things shown up in a virtual learning space? And that is it for right now for my questions, Brandon. I know that was a lot.
Yeah, it's great. I thank you for your comments. I mean, everything that we hear from the board informs our work at the district level. And I hope we'll have continued chances to sort of update how we are incorporating everything that you're mentioning, because it's really in line with where we're trying to go. I just want to thank you for those. I don't have anything super particular on those at this moment.
Bryn, do you want me to take a partnering on
Yeah.
I'm Sarah
Please.
Kanivi. I have two roles. I wear two hats. I work at Henderson, at Dr. Virginia Henderson Elementary, and I also have allocation at central office. So I feel like I get the best of both worlds because I have a real strong pulse. I'm actually teaching in a 4th grade classroom right now. So 10 kiddos every day, me and them, we just go for it. I actually think Nikki's question related to reducing restraint and seclusion and Ali's question related to trauma, they are so hand in hand because we actually, when we choose strategies that harm our students, we have perpetuated that cycle. And I can speak for a school-based example. When I first arrived at Henderson 7 years ago, there were certain years we had over 80 restraints and seclusion. By now, we have arrived in a year where we will have less than 5, and that's disappointing for us if we even have a 1 or 2. And it wasn't anything on the kids' responsibility. It was all on the responsibility of our staff to figure out what it was we needed to do differently. And so some of the things I think we need to keep lifting is how adults in the building are viewing behavior and how they're taking care of themselves in intense moments, how our own knowledge of mental health for ourselves and understanding of how the brain works comes into play in those really pivotal moments in our students' lives. And we under talk about this, but it got brought up from Carletra on the school visits. How are we collaborating with each other? Because if we just continue to go down this road of single person solutions, that is not where the magic happens. When teachers get to team with staff and you form these pockets of community, you can tag out, you can use strategies. So I think we have a lot of ingredients in place. Super excited to build that up to scale and see what that would look like throughout the city.
Thank you so much for speaking to the trauma portion of my question. I think the other question I want to emphasize is around how we support staff in terms of the behavior education plan. And both how do we support staff who are struggling around behavior, but I want to be very clear about this. The data that we have produced for the last few decades as a district indicates that we discriminate against Black students and subject Black students to more severe punishment more frequently. What are we doing to address that discrimination, to make sure that when students see in their classroom that certain young people, based on what they look like, are more likely to be sent out of class, are more likely to be disciplined, are more likely to be disciplined more severely, that we as a district have a pulse of that, are aware of that, and intervene to support the teacher and shift their behavior?
Thank you, Ali. Karuzi and then Sadian.
Thanks, Ananda. Thanks so much, Bryn, for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're in year 7 of the BEP now. I think my oldest was in 7th grade when we started implementing it. So that means that kids who are seniors this year have spent more than half their time in MMSD with the BEP. And the disproportionalities persist. They haven't gone away. I find that incredibly concerning. And Ali has expressed, and Ananda and many people around this table have expressed repeated concern about the fact that despite the fact that we've had a superintendent's advisory committee, we've had lots of staff development, we've had lots and lots of emphasis on changing staff mindsets, we've invested in developmental designs and NVIC, and the disproportionalities still persist. And as board members, I think it's our responsibility to take the long view and say, what about the policy and its implementation, at the large scale is not working? And where do we need to change the policy or invest our district's resources to make it work better? And I feel like we need to have that conversation as a board, especially while we have this opportunity of not having kids in school, and to step back and say, what are the key levers here that we need to push to make the change we want to see, which is we don't want to see this disproportionality in exclusionary discipline in particular anymore. One thing I've often wondered, and I don't have any data to back this up, but it seems like we have schools that are doing much better with the BEP. And it seems like some of those schools have phenomenal principals who really know how to lead a team to implement the BEP in a way that is addressing disproportionality and is getting the staff not just to have the right mindset, but truly enthusiastic about embracing that goal. And if that's true, and I don't know if that's true, how do we try to either get our what role do principals play in making this work? And how can we better support our principals to support their staff to get to that goal that we all share? I guess that would be my question.
Chris, I can jump in on this. Right, I do think, Chris, you're right. A building leader, right, sets the shared climate and culture in a school, and a building leader should know what's going on in classrooms all the time. And I think that some of our building leaders are in all different places across the district, but we continue to work on this. We continue to talk about it. We continue to provide support. But it's, as Dr. Jenkins has said, we need to move from talk to action, right? And we need to be really clear if we are an anti-racist district in an anti-racist school, and our schools are anti-racist, what does that look like and sound like? And teachers have to be able to articulate that, and children have to be able to articulate that. I'll tell a story from my last year at a school I was at. I had a teacher, and 90% of the referrals were coming out of her classroom. And I said, we need to talk about this because 90% of the referrals are coming out of your classroom. And it was really hard for me to say. It was very hard for her to hear. We sat down a lot. We sat down that night. We sat down the next night to talk about what was happening. We put some things in place and I monitored and checked on it, but it does take that continual watching, coming back after it, revisiting it again, putting plans in action. So I do think it's about taking action on things and having those conversations that lead to action. And it's not just talking. It's not just helping people feel comfortable. There's a lot of uncomfortableness in it because it makes people look inside. So I would just say from my own experience as a leader, I think that's part of what it takes for moving a culture forward. But I would also maybe Carletra or Tremaine, there's anything else you would want to add to that?
I would agree with what you said, Lisa. I would also add, there are leaders right now that are doing some intentional work around what adaptations are going to be made when we do return, what strategies they're going to be using, looking at things differently. How are we engaging students? How are students being successful now in virtual, where we can take some of those same lessons that we're learning and apply those for when they return face to face. And so there is some intentional work being done around that right now, even though we're in a virtual environment, just preparing for that face-to-face instruction to happen again.
And I can add too, and then I'll give Sarah Kanivi a quick comment, and also Jamie want to chime in, but just to highlight, this is, yeah, Chris, I appreciate all of your comments, and it, I think, relates to Ali's comments before you, and this is not, we can't underestimate the amount of work it takes and the amount of mindset work it takes. And yes, we've taken a lot of steps in the right direction. And there are a lot of pockets of work in our district where there are really promising bright spots that we can build on. And as a system, we have to do better. And so part of this action planning guide that's linked at the end too of the slides is what we're using as a district to look deeply. You're right, we have to look at all of it. We have to look at the policy, we have to look at practice, we have to use our data, and we have to really be willing to look at things differently in terms of we can't keep doing the same thing and getting the same results. So, and in certain of those practices you named, those are research-based approaches to reducing disproportionality in school discipline. And sometimes we haven't gone far enough, right? We have to really commit fully to some of these approaches. And some of what was shared in the ad hoc around restorative justice was about that. What does it show? What does research show? What do other districts teach us about what you really need to do to meaningfully make these changes? I'll pass to Sarah and then Jay.
Super quick comment, Chris. I think one thing we've neglected is to really look at our positive outliers, the pockets of schools, of classrooms that have really, really taken on disproportionality. And we have stories to tell around that. We spend the bulk of our time admiring the problem in the data versus really lifting where it has significantly shifted. And to pull that into the research world, the University of Chicago is doing great research right now. Principal as both instructional leader and leader of climate. For so long, it had been to the neglect of leader of climate. And they have some great research coming out. The principal's role as the person who sets the tone for climate. We know that intuitively. And now there's some support to help us get there. So just those two quick comments.
And just to add one last thing too, as we're going into the allocation season, there is some work as well being done around what are we looking at for staffing that's proactive in the strategies that we're using and not staffing that is reactive. And so what does that look like as schools implement more things around restorative justice and who's going to lead that work?
If I may add one or two things, please. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we're talking about the restorative process, but we also need to have the conversation about surrounding our students with mirror models. We need to have discussions of, there are two things that are happening that we've been expecting different results in. One is the response to behaviors, but it's also the instructional delivery model that we're in, the curriculum that we've been using with children over the years. This is the chance to make those adjustments to be more culturally relevant, to see themselves within the curriculum. We're beginning those conversations, but there's going to have to be a lot of self-reflection, both on the leaders, the teachers, the central office, on how to truly make these adjustments. The disproportionality, it's, Ali, I remember last year around this time when you were asking those questions, and I sat down with Jay afterwards and we started talking about what are some possibilities of what we could and how we could make these shifts. I'm proud to say that I know in curriculum instruction, we're having those discussions now, but again, as Dr. Jenkins has said, it's the discussions. We need to change all aspects of what public school looks like in order to make these connections and make sure that all students and families feel welcomed in our school.
Jay, were you gonna add something?
Yeah, just briefly, many of my points I think have been covered just by what people have brought into the space. But again, I appreciate this conversation. I just want to take the opportunity to remind of the complexity. And I think over the years and historically, we've talked about behavior sort of in a silo and as an individual plan. And, you know, again, I'll point to the work that we did in 1819 with Chair Reyes leading an ad hoc committee where we dug deep into the policy, we dug deep into resources needed, and we dug deep into additional programming and supports. But, you know, much of the policy that we're referring to and where we get the disproportionality is in the response. And I would point to all of the complex things that we can do proactively. And Mike certainly just raised curriculum efforts. And I know the way the meeting began today, we were highlighting a conversation, you know, that we're hoping to have in a deeper way around curriculum. I think all of our racial justice work as a district, all of our work on mindset, all of our hiring practices have shifted. And to the point that Carletra was even calling out, you know, the focus on social emotional learning. And I think Sarah and Cynthia Moore leading that work in our district now in virtual space, but also preparing and making sure our schools are ready to meet our students' needs when they return and maintain that focus on social emotional learning. Savion raised the questions of mental health support when students return. We know that behaviors are symptoms of students that do not have what they need and are not safe, supported, and feel that sense of belonging. And so I just want to sort of bring back up the complexity of this, that to some extent, it's everything that we do to engage and support our students. When we don't get that right, we tend to see behaviors. But I think keeping our focus on everything that we can do proactively, while also digging deep into what can we do differently when we react to eliminate disproportionality.
Caruzi, is there anything else? Because I think some of the things that Jay and Mike were responding to and Bren were to Ali's question. So Ali, did you had a follow-up to your question or from anything folks have shared?
I just have a quick follow-up comment, which is
sorry.
Appreciate all of your comments. And Bren, you had mentioned in particular that we might need to go farther with some of these research-based interventions. If there is a need for the board to reallocate resources to make that happen, we're heading into our budget season. So it'd be good to know, if it's going to happen this year, what that might mean and what that might look like. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Ali?
Bryn, did you want to respond to the follow-up question from Chris? And then I have,
I will just simply say, yes, Chris, I hear you. I am noting that. Thank you.
Yeah, Sarah, I want to go back to something you actually said. And Lisa, I think you spoke most directly to my original point, so I really appreciate you for doing that. But Sarah, you talked about highlighting the schools that are doing well. Are there schools in MMSD where Black students are not disproportionately represented in discipline?
We don't have any schools to my knowledge where it's 1-for-1. I know we have schools that have gotten it as low as 1.4. Starting, I think elementary average last year when we left was around 4.3 maybe, or maybe that was district average. I will pour over the numbers. I haven't this year looked at disproportionality numbers because we haven't used exclusionary practices, so I can go back to the spring semester. I think there's some schools that have definitely reduced it. I also think there's pockets of teams that have reduced it and grade level bands that have reduced it. And those are the spaces we need to be really curious about.
Yeah, I think that those are incredible points, but I also do think that this has been a consistent problem across 53 schools.
100%.
And if we have a school that has not shrunk the achievement gap, but has actually achieved proportional discipline, I absolutely want to hear about that. And I want it to be highlighted to the greatest possible extent. However, if we haven't achieved that, I think we have a lot of work to do across the district. And I do think it makes a lot of sense to focus on that work.
100% agree.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Savion?
Thank you. I want to go back to something Lisa mentioned about particular teachers and percent of out-of-class referrals. Do we keep data on out-of-class referrals or detentions given per teacher?
So we have, as you know, we, oh God, what year are we in of EduClimber? I think 18-19 was the first year of EduClimber. So yes, we do have a way to track that. And what we're working on is also making sure fidelity in terms of how people are entering behavior data so that we can be sure that we're able to accurately look at that. I know, again, some schools are better at it than others in terms of making sure that the data gets in with, if it occurs in a classroom, the observer is the classroom teacher. We are working on that fidelity across the district so that we can really have meaningful data to look at exactly that.
Yeah.
So it's like a yes, and it needs to be better.
Yeah, that fidelity piece is huge because every out-of-class referral is simply a tip of the iceberg between a relationship between, or lack thereof, between a student and a teacher, and general interest in what is going on in that young person's life. And would be interested to see if, embracing relationship building with your students, with students that you teach and serve, how this could be put into, the SIP, into the staffing decisions and the potential rubric that we have coming up on surplus layoff. And then my other question is, so as Ali has pointed out, one end of this, it's discrimination. Another end is, what traumas are students experiencing? What adverse childhood experiences are our students experiencing in school and outside of school? So I'm wondering how the BEP can incorporate trauma-informed care, particularly at the early grade levels, especially as we start this all-day 4K experiment and at the kindergarten, first grade bands.
Yeah, I'm writing all this down. It's definitely, I think that trauma-informed piece is key, and that is where it's really thinking about where's the right leverage point to make sure that that happens. Is it through policy? Is it through practice level guidance? It's checking our data to make sure that we're living out our values, that we're following our guidance. And so, yes, 100%, we could do better on that at all levels. And I'm writing it down and keeping it in the forefront.
Lisa, were you going to say something? Ms. Beth? Okay. Julia?
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. So first, thanks for reiterating the goal of keeping students in the classroom. I think that's really important. And I was just wondering, what do the school level alternatives to suspension actually look like, or what should they look like in an ideal world?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. And that's a question that I spent time asking, or was over the last couple of years, not this year, but talking with students at Restore about, and it is amazing what students come up with. And I know many of our, high school staff are asking students, what do we need to do? What's the best response here? So for alternatives to suspension, I'll go quickly. I know it is late, but types of things. So it looks like sitting down, and keep in mind, right, this is for secondary. So we're talking about middle schoolers or high schoolers, and we're talking about people in buildings sitting down with a student and saying, all right, instead of having a suspension, if you are interested in engaging in a restorative process with a staff person. Now, of course, that's something that should be happening anyway, right? So this is a step towards where we want to be, right? So it could be going through a restorative process if it was something that involved a conflict with another student or a teacher. And that's one of the things we're working on through this RJ cohort, is really trying to build out meaningfully how that can look, and in making sure that we include that adult and system accountability level as well, not just on the student, but when something occurs, what are we learning about adults in the building, what they need to work on, mindset work, other work, and what are we learning about how our system also might need to change. If there are other types of interventions, right? If it's something related to drug use that a student could engage in, other types of interventions they can opt into. Sometimes there would be a group they could opt into. We're really giving, schools are putting their creativity to come up with really meaningful responses that are grounded in what students need. Yeah, so thank you. Sarah, did you want to chime in, or you were just off? Okay, great. Thank you. Great question.
Thanks. And then I just had one other question. So I know Chris and Ali and I think Sarah all brought up that some schools or pockets are doing much better than others as far as shrinking the gap, at least, which isn't ideal. But have there been efforts to compare that data from teachers or students or principals to figure out why they're doing better, if it's principals or some other reason, or if it's correlative to different levels of trauma that student bodies might be facing? Have there been those efforts to compare data, or might there be in the future?
I know from a school perspective, and I'm speaking for one school, just like we look at academic data, we look at behavior data. In the pandemic times, we look at engagement data and attendance data more than behavior, but during regular school years, there isn't a single quarter that goes by where teacher teams are not looking at their behavior referral data and asking each other hard questions about the disproportionality. That's a school-based practice that I think has replication efforts and can be replicated in other schools. It goes back to Lisa's point when we draw attention to when we zoom out, we can see patterns and we can speak more directly to how it is that we're creating that pattern and that we're doing that harm. So I do think we have the capability to do that, to look at teachers and teams and practices, not in a shaming way, but in a what support do you need for this to look different.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Gloria?
Thank you, Ananda. All this is making me very nervous. And I feel like we've come a long way, but we're still not quite there. And it's making me nervous on a few fronts, right? I think when we see the disproportionality in discipline and arrest, right, we ultimately, that really ultimately shows and demonstrates our failure, right, as a school district across the board, right? Education, responding to behavior, mental health, et cetera. And so what has happened, what ultimately happens when we don't get this right is that we let history repeat itself. And, we moved quickly to move officers into our schools to respond to behavior, right? At one point in history, and it didn't solve the issue. And our community has asked us to take officers out of our school due to disproportionality. I know that it is naive to think that it is the officers that were solely responsible for the arrests of behaviors in our schools, that it was ultimately the responsibility within our school district, in our failures to really deal with behaviors and ultimately build the capacity within our schools and our teachers and our staff and provide support systems. And it's not only just MMSD, but it is the community, right? It is our family structure. It is across the board. We are all responsible for the failures of our children. And so so when we have behavior incidents in our schools and we don't have the capacity to respond to those in a way in which it's trauma informed, where we are providing restorative justice, where we are equipped within our schools, then what do we see, right? What is the outcome? We move quickly to call the police as if the police is going to solve our behavior issues, right? And that's where we found ourselves in, right? I mean, we can blame officers all we want, but that wasn't the underlying issue here. And so I feel like we haven't gotten to the root causes and really been able to support our schools. And when we talk about the BEP, it is a cultural shift. And it is a culture shift that we have been trying to change for the past, 8 years? And we are still struggling. And we can't have this narrative that one school is doing better than the other schools. We all need to be in this together. And if, like Dr. Jenkins says, if we're going to be an anti-racist school district, we have to be an anti-racist school district. And so my question is, what are we going to do at the point in time when the behavior is so out of control because we have not equipped our teachers, our staff, to deal with the behavior issues that rises to the level of a situation in schools, battery, disorderly conduct, We can put a whole bunch of ordinances and attach them to a behavior issue. And so I just don't want us to go down that path again. And so I really don't. I think we have come a long way. I just don't feel like we're there. And I'm concerned about, as Savion says, the increased significant amount of trauma that we're going to be faced with when we reopen schools. And so what are we going to do to ensure that our teachers, our staff are equipped and are prepared to deal with the overwhelming issues and challenges of behavior in our schools that we are going to expect in the coming years?
Brian, Sarah, no.
I think I'm going to do a slight reframe if I can, just because I think this crosses over into some of the other conversations of the safety and security ad hoc, and I know there'll be further discussions of that work on the 15th, February 15th. So I don't want to kind of cross over into that in this presentation, and I want to ground us back in, that this is all of our work. This is about creating those school communities where students feel loved, feel seen, and that we need to drive our work from that place, from that vision of where we are going to, and building up those supports for all of our students, and then and not to drive it by the outlier scenarios that you have mentioned there. So I kind of don't want to shift our frame to looking at those scenarios, but I want to keep it grounded in what we're trying to talk about here with the BEP as a whole, and how we create communities where everyone can be supported. And sort of going back to response earlier, just because we've been trying some things for a number of years and we haven't solved this problem completely, doesn't mean that those efforts aren't on the right track. It may mean we need to do them more deeply, more meaningfully. Mindset work takes time. It's taken an incredible number of years of systemic racism to get to the point where we are now. It's going to take a lot of intentional work to get us out.
Thank you, Brent, for that. I understand that the outliers, right? That could be an outlier, but it wasn't an outlier for years, right? And that's why we are where we are today. And I mean, I just think that we have to really, and I'm pushing us because I see that this is exactly, if we do not move on this quickly, with a sense of urgency, that we will find ourselves again here within the next 10 years. We're going to be looking back and we'll be like, oh, we haven't quite dealt with the behavior in our schools that have risen to the level of disproportionality in discipline and in arrest. And so I just, I know a lot of work, we have a lot of work to do. A lot of good work has happened. But I just don't want us to repeat ourselves.
I absolutely hear you. And I know we will need to move on, but I do want to point us to the research and the resources in that last slide, right? Because I always like to, pull out books, and I know this talks about a lot of the things we're doing and that we need to do them more deeply, more meaningfully. We need to commit over time to what does work to move systems forward. And I hear what you're saying, absolutely.
Thank you, Bren. Thank you, Gloria. Schmidt? And I see you, Sabian.
Sabian, did you have a follow-up to that you wanted to get in quick?
Yeah, I say this with all love and respect. We just need to be careful about this concept of family structure, especially for Black and Brown families, considering, living under that boot of oppression. When we switch our frame, Black families have actually shown a remarkable degree of resiliency in America. And so I'm just going to offer that.
So I guess my question is kind of a little detail oriented, but it was focusing on the alternatives to suspension slide and the restorative approaches to student staff conflict slides. And those were, focused on what we're doing and the next steps we're going to take. In a couple places, there was an indication that the next steps were an additional template. The outcome was a template that we're going to use when we return to in-person learning. And to me, it seems that the templates are a tool to get us to the outcome that's student-centered. And so I'm trying to think, how can we move through that, creating more plans, creating more templates, and getting to the student-centered outcomes. So if you're talking about the behavior being, trying to find alternative reactions to students swearing at teachers, like the outcome we want to get to is fewer students being suspended and fewer students swearing at teachers. So how do we, how is the process taking us there to get to that, and not just stopping at the template mode? And maybe this is just me entering this conversation. This has been a really complex, lots of years of work, but just wondering if, we can see that in some of the planning too. And then I guess I'll just throw out my last question. It feels to me, especially when we're talking about students at the secondary level, that we sort of treat students as passive participants in this process. And how do we kind of, look at students, the students are the center of the restorative justice process. And so how are we looking at how we're increasing their efficacy and how they're experiencing these processes along the way?
Ooh, thank you. Yeah, sorry. And I know it's the hard part about slides, right? And having a short presentation and wanting to connect those actionable items that we are sort of trying to translate things into. What does this look like in a classroom? What can this look like? And that's what those templates are really. And those are co-created with schools and with student input, and really, I wish you all could be with us in some of these meetings, because I think, what the mindset work that we're doing on ourselves, with each other, really trying to dig at. So, right, you can plop down a template or a script, and if it's not done with the right mindset, it won't have the right effect. But if it is, it can be so incredibly powerful, and it's hard to make that come to life, right? And I think that's what you're getting at. And so I guess I think one of the things I think one of the things that we're doing with this cohort to look at restorative responses to student staff conflict is really taking that holistic lens, looking at what does restorative and transformative justice mean, and then how do we take these specific instances and apply those concepts so that we are moving things forward. I'll see if anyone else wants to jump in, but I also know it's late, and it's a great question and great conversation. Rochelle.
Yep. So hello, everybody. My name is Rochelle Stone. I'm one of the restorative justice coaches for the district, and also was an elementary school teacher for a really long time. And I think what's really important, I'll try to answer your question, but I also recognize there are a lot of thoughts in my head. I think the biggest thing for me when thinking about doing this work and thinking about what needs to change is that we really need to think about dismantling the systems that are rooted in white supremacy. And we also need to put youth and family voice at the center of that, because at the end of the day, it really comes to how can we work in service of Black liberation. And so how do we really take these systems that are harmful to Black and Brown students, harmful to Black and Brown families and Black and Brown staff, and how do we sort of restore our humanity to something different and not restore ourselves to white supremacy? And I think when we look at these systems of behavior, it's often rooted in white supremacy. And so how do we really take this time, especially during this pandemic, where there are more folks available on Zoom. We are able to collaborate across schools, collaborate across grade levels to really think about what does this really look like, sound like, and feel like when we come back. Because I think what's happening in these conversations and what might not be, it might not appear like it on the slide, is that people are really thinking about what we were doing before was not working. We understand it wasn't working. They're understanding their participation in it and the harm that was being caused. And so how do we really uproot that and take this time to not take what we were doing through the portal, if you will? And so how do we really think about, eventually we will come back, and eventually we'll come back in this way that won't look like before, because it can't, right? We can't kick kids out because it's not safe when we're still in these pandemic sort of times. And so how do you really start to think about what systems really need to look differently and what can we really do in this moment?
Thank you. And again, I would just say, if we can come back to somehow, like when we talk about this again, have some information on how students are experiencing the practices that we're putting into place and how the staff is experiencing it too. So I really appreciate you speaking to that. And thank you for the resources too. I did take a look at that slide, and I have been digging into the resources. And so I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And then thank you, Rochelle, for your comments. You know, Laura, there's something that Gloria said around we're going to be 10 years in the future and we're going to be here. And I had pulled up an article from Scott Girard last year, and we're having this same topic. And the title of the article was Madison School District suspensions still disproportionately given to Black students, those with disabilities. And then had some quotes from some of us. And then I know that if I talk to some of educators, particularly educators of color in our district, they would say those were here 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and 30 years ago. And I hear sort of this energy around like, what is the thing? What is the thing that we're going to do? And I really appreciate the last couple comments from Bryn and your comments, particularly Rochelle, on really a really sharp analysis around we actually do know the root causes of disproportionality. It's not a mystery. Is that we just really struggling saying that. We have racism in our schools. And that's deeply rooted in also how we educate and how we discipline children and how we understand their behavior. So when we talk about being in an anti-racist district, what is the policies that are going to support us to move into that? It's definitely not a revamping of the BAP. It's definitely not, doing, additional research. And I really appreciate, Bryn, all your research. I really appreciate Maisha Wynn's framework. That's the framework we're using at the department as well. But at the root, it's really around changing adult practices for every adult in every building. And I will highlight that there was a couple of sobering moments for me around implementation of BAP. One was in a feedback session around the BAP early in its implementation. And I was sitting on the table with this educator, and she had deep issues on our goals for Black students. And I think for me, it was like a good reminder that even though we are calling ourselves, or we are aiming, we're inspiring to be anti-racist, and we are doing a comprehensive body of research and practices and whatnot, and bringing all this framework to fruition, there are people, educators in our, and I say with a lot of respect to my fellow educators, that deeply believe that there's something inherently wrong with Black and brown children. And until we really can say that very explicit, that we still have folks in our district that believe in superiority of race, and maybe they're not framing it this way, they're just calling inferiority of race. It's going to be extremely challenged for us to be, in a meeting and see something different. So I appreciate you all's work, and if you have anything else to add about what is the pursuit of anti-racist policies, an anti-racist budget, an anti-racist collective accountability process, I would like to hear that, or just to ponder.
I did see Dr. Jenkins unmuting, so I wasn't sure if he wanted to defer, if you were wanting to chime in, Dr. Jenkins.
No, why don't you guys go ahead and finish? I'll close.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, Rochelle, do you want to chime in on Ananda's question? I mean, I think it gets at the heart of transformational justice and restorative justice.
Sure. And then I saw that I think Ali has a question too. Ali, do you want to go first, or?
Michelle, if you want to speak directly to Ananda's point, I don't think our points are necessarily related, but thank you for the opportunity.
So I agree with what was said before, and I don't remember who said it, so I apologize, of this internal work that has to happen, because I agree with you, Ananda. I think you can't lessen away racism. You can't, have a curriculum or a toolkit that you give teachers and then it's really weaponized and harmful within the classroom. And I also think we have to really consider that, yes, I believe in restorative justice and I believe in racial justice. And I think that even with restorative justice in place at a school, we have to look at all the other systems that aren't rooted in restorative justice, that aren't related or aren't rooted in like love and care and wanting a sense of belonging for students, because you can have restorative frameworks and conversations, but you still have suspension within your school. You still have curriculum that's really harmful. We still have how we're talking to students and how we're talking to families. So I think that has to be this really deep internal work that we as a district really look at and say, there are teachers and there are staff and there are people in buildings that are harming Black and brown students, and what happens when that happens. And how do we hold people accountable for those actions? Because until that happens, we will continue to harm students. And people can do all the PDs and all of the workshops, but if you're not taking that back into applicable practice and actually shifting the mindset of how your community is within your classroom or within your hallways or whatever, we're just going to perpetuate the same thing. So I think it's us as a district taking a really hard look, and not just us, like also involving community organizations and families and youth as well, because we can't just do this in a vacuum. We can't look at ourselves and do the work. We also have to have that feedback in connection and sort of co-liberation and co-design together. I don't know if that answered your question, but those were my thoughts.
No, it was great. Thank you so much. I think there's enough energy on this board for some really bold approaches. I'm really hoping to have a different meeting when we talk about the BEP again. Ali?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think we have to acknowledge that Black students can't afford for us to pat ourselves on the back along the way. And Black students can't afford for us to be impressed with minor or slight improvement. We can't be impressed by going from being one of the worst districts in the country to being the second or third worst district in the country for Black students. That is not what we're aiming for here. The other thing I want to highlight is something that Julia said, which I think is really powerful. What is the alternative? And oftentimes when we talk about what is the alternative, we forget that we use the alternative for other kids already, right? We don't suspend every student who swears at a teacher, right? We're more likely to suspend a Black student who uses an obscenity in class than a white student who uses an obscenity in class, whether they're directed at teachers or not. The alternatives exist. We have had ways of mitigating the damage that punishment causes to students for white students the entire time we as a district have existed. That's why white students are the largest demographic of young people at our district and one of the least likely demographics of children to get in trouble. So if we can avoid, criminalizing our white students, we can avoid it for everybody else. There is no shortage of young white people who use drugs or underage drink or engage in theft in this community. I grew up here, y'all. I've been around too many of our children to think that that is the case. And so when we talk about what the alternative is, when we talk about restorative justice options, when we talk about routes to community service or different ways in which a young person can be engaged and rebuild community, when we talk about access to mental health support, who gets to go to therapy, right? Those are all racialized conversations, and we have to be honest and transparent about that if we want to navigate a different future. And so I think we have had the opportunity to have a pretty candid conversation this evening, and hopefully we continue to have this conversation and emphasize the importance of doing what's right for our most vulnerable young people, our young people who sit at the intersection of race and poverty and disability, and what it means to be a part of the LGBTQ community, and acknowledge that those are our students who are the most likely to be arrested, most likely to get in trouble at school, and also the young people who have historically been denied access to an education.
Really, Rochelle or Bryn?
Thank you.
No, I totally agree. So I have there's nothing that I think needs to be said.
Thank you. Yeah, Julia.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for everyone who's spoken already. I just wanted to bring up a presentation in my homeroom class that I think we had last year. And it was some statistics from West that showed that suspensions had decreased drastically in the last couple of years. And frankly, people didn't take it very seriously, and students and teachers alike both kind of laughed at it. And the reason is, I think, well, yes, it's critical and it's good that students are being kicked out of classrooms less. That's extremely important. And the reality is that we haven't seen learning improve, and we haven't seen behavior in schools improve. Meanwhile, suspensions have been decreasing, and it hasn't shown those outcomes. And I think the number of students reporting feeling safe at schools has even gotten significantly worse in the same time that suspension has been decreasing. And I don't think that those are causing one another, but I think it is true that decreased suspensions aren't fixing the problems that we're talking about in these conversations. And I don't know if that's because we're having the wrong conversation, but again, I'd just like to highlight the importance, I think, of comparing data across schools, across the district, to find out why things are working in places that they're working, and then also working with families in addition to just teachers, and coming at it from a place that keeps students' trauma and experiences and identity at the front, because I think that that same conversation has been happening for years, and it's not really working.
Thank you, Julia. And then Gloria, very succinct, Gloria.
I just have a question for Julia. What are you reading from? What was that?
Those are just some of my thoughts from a presentation that we had last year in our homeroom, where
okay,
it was, I think the school district or the school put together statistics on suspensions, and it was supposed to be kind of a testament to the success that had occurred, but that's not really what we're seeing in the outcomes. And I think it's important that the conversation makes sure to kind of differentiate those two things.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. I want to give folks an opportunity to do some closing remarks. So I don't know, Lisa, if you, or like, sorry, Brain, oh, Savian, do you have another question?
Or has Nikki gone yet?
Yeah, she was the first one.
Oh, got it. Okay, never mind.
Thank you, Savian, for making sure that I call everybody. So I want to make sure that Bryn or Lisa have any final comments around the presentation, and then give Dr. Jenkins an opportunity for some closing comments.
Thank you, Ananda. I will allow Dr. Jenkins to have the final word on this.
Anything else, Bryn?
No, thank you.
Thank you both for the presentation and for taking notes and staying attentive to my colleagues and my comments. Dr. Jenkins? I know you're going to say something
Okay.
really good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, where I am, I sat purposely and just wanted to observe. And this time last year, Scott Gerard had the article. And I remember before coming here and just looking at the various reports, the OCR report, which we haven't talked about, you know, this whole consternation in the community around the BEP. And when I walked into the district, I heard that we were a district striving to be anti-racist. And I asked that question everywhere I go here. What does that look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? And I watched this board meeting tonight. I watched us. Earlier, we were talking about reopening. And I mean every one of us, because you can't call it unless you call it out. Every one of us, when we're talking about reopening, we talked about athletics. We had a degree of excitement and a degree of questioning of one another, just going to find a way to make it happen. But it's always a drop in the conversation when it comes to talking about eradicating those policies or practices that have, since the infancy of America, that has held down Black people. It's in, when you go look at Article 2, Section 1, and it talks about 3/5 of a human being. You talk about property, you're talking about someone subhuman. That is still the attitude we carry today. So it will change when we get ready for it to change, not a day before. And if we don't acknowledge it as a group, then we can't get any better. I also want to point out, when you heard from your African-American staff member who's taught in this district, she called it straight out. She didn't even play with it. There's 2 conversations going on in Madison right now, and we all need to get to one conversation. There's one conversation we have publicly, and there's one conversation we have privately. It's time we move forward. I'm straight up in the movement for anyone who wants to know. Okay? Oppression anywhere is a threat to oppression, to anywhere. It's a threat if we allow it to happen. And Dr. King said it best, right? Injustice. And that's what we got to be talking about, injustice. But really what we need to be talking about is justice. We want to have justice for all children in our district. We have to even govern ourselves better when we have these conversations. I want to be excited to talk about advanced learning and all of our children going in advanced learning. I want to be excited about talking about we can get rid of this seclusion. I want to get excited about all of our children having alternatives to something better. And if it's for 10 years, we won't be here in this same place, because trust me, there's already a plan to do away with public education. And all they want us to do is to continue to do what we've done. Why don't some Black and brown parents want to go back to school right now? They said, will it be better for my child? This is the lowest suspension rate ever in the history of American education. And the children, some of them, a lot of them are doing better. So I'm just telling you, if they don't get suspended in virtual, why do they have to get suspended in brick and mortar? That comes back to attitude of adults. And yes, children have adverse childhood experiences, and those are not just children of color who have adverse childhood experiences. Those are not children who are born how they are born, and then we're judging them differently once they come back in brick and mortar. So I'm just telling you, I think this is a pivotal conversation tonight. I think it's recorded, and we all need to go back and look at it and see where was the enthusiasm. And it is unacceptable to not be prepared on this topic. This is what we're talking about. We said we want to be bold. This is bold. Take it on if we want to be the model. Take this on, this issue right here. Take this on. I talked to MTI, and they said that they want to be an anti-racist organization. They actually have Kerry right now who's leading that work. And I say, really? Really? Then let's see. Let's take on these things, guys. This is not acceptable by any means what we just had this conversation on. And everyone should be enthused to do something about it. That's all I had to say.
Dang. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins. It's really hard to follow that. So how about a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Julia, your advisory. Oh, thank you, Ellie. Julia, your advisory vote. Yeah, yes, sorry. Thank you, Julia. All those in favor say aye. 7-0 motion passed and meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Dr. Jenkins. I have to process everything that you just said now. Thank you.